Chapter 658. As time passed, I wandered around the antique city every day. I couldn't tell if my state of mind had improved or not, but my understanding of the antique city had reached the point where I knew it like the back of my hand. As for little Wang Li, my previous conjecture was confirmed. The thing that was parasitizing him was indeed very afraid of me. In the past few days, little Wang Li had been feeling unwell several times, but he didn't react much. He just cried occasionally, and his face darkened. When he was sick, as long as I appeared, he would quickly calm down. This kind of situation, imperceptibly, gave me a lot of pressure. Little Wang Li's situation was obviously not as optimistic as we had expected. The thing in the black spot on his chest could relapse at any time. As long as it was completely eradicated, little Wang Li's life could be saved and I could rest assured. According to my previous thoughts, as long as little Wang Li is fine for the time being, we can all relax for a long time. Zhang Kanwen doesn't have to put all his energy on him, and I can also do my own things with peace of mind. Now, I can only be glad that little Wang Li's illness wasn't serious, so it shouldn't affect me doing my own things. But it was impossible to rest assured. It was also impossible for Zhang Kanwen to relax, and he couldn't put all his attention back on his cultivation. The only good thing was that I had successfully researched the sound-transmitting talisman. In the future, if I wasn't here, Zhang Kanwen could find me at any time with the sound-transmitting talisman. It wouldn't be like last time, when he had to use all his strength to suppress little Wang Li's illness. And at the same time, he had to use the sound-transmitting talisman to inform me. I had asked Zhang Kanwen about the conditions needed to activate the yin-yang yama brush. Although he was vague about it, I roughly understood that the cost of activating the yin-yang yama brush was definitely not small. So, to a certain extent, I was largely responsible for the collapse of all the Dao Qi stars in Zhang Kanwen's body. So in the past few days, I had been thinking about how to help Zhang Kanwen recover his cultivation. But after thinking about it, I didn't have any other way. My cultivation mainly came from the Death Scripture. After entering the glorious consciousness realm, I encountered many fortuitous encounters and quickly broke through to the celestial master realm. None of these methods were suitable for Zhang Kanwen. Moreover, this fellow was stubborn. Even if there was a good cultivation method, he would not be willing to try it. There was no other reason other than that he was the last person of the Wanshan lineage. He could not give up on the cultivation method of the Wanshan lineage and cultivate another method. This had nothing to do with the speed of his cultivation. It was just his own determination. So, all I could do was silently wish him well in my heart. As for little Wang Li, there's not much I can do. I can only accompany this little guy more. This pitiful fellow had been tortured almost every day since he was born. If my company could make him feel a little better, I was naturally willing to do so. Of course, while accompanying him, I was also prepared to deal with the evil being's counterattack. I didn't know why, but every time I saw that evil creature wreaking havoc in little Wang Li's body, I couldn't help but think of sacrificing souls. Although I still didn't know who he was or what he was, I knew from previous events that he was an old monster that had lived for a long time. In the face of such a situation, he should have a solution, unlike me and Zhang Kanwen, who could only stall for time. Moreover, from previous experiences, he was willing to help me. Unfortunately, I had completely cut off contact with him. I didn't know where to look for him, even if I wanted to find him. 10 days passed uneventfully. During this time, Fatty didn't even leave his room once. If it wasn't for the fact that he would occasionally take the food that was delivered to the door, I wouldn't have been able to resist rushing in to look for him. With my understanding of Fatty, if he had only been studying the sound-transmitting talisman, he definitely wouldn't have taken so long. Even if something had gone wrong in the middle, he wouldn't have been so crazy. The only reason was that he had abandoned the sound-transmitting talisman and continued to return to the experience that had made him depressed. I used the sound-transmitting talisman to send messages several times, but he didn't reply even once. I was very worried, but when I rushed to the door and was about to break in, I sensed the aura coming from the room. In the end, I didn't dare to knock on the door. The biggest taboo in the path of divination was other people's interference, especially when the practitioner was casting a spell. If they were disturbed, All of their previous efforts would be wasted, and they would suffer a backlash. If it were serious, their meridians would be damaged, and they would no longer be able to sense the mysteries of heaven. Although I was worried about Fatty's safety, I wouldn't do such a stupid thing to affect him. I could only keep my worries to myself. Another 2 days passed. The date we had agreed on with Lu Jinyang was getting closer and closer, but there was still no news from Fatty. During these 2 days, I didn't even dare to sleep. I had a bad premonition, so I didn't go out. When I had time, I would linger in front of Fatty's door. As soon as there was any movement, I would immediately rush over. As for Lu Jinyang, I had already thought about it. As long as Fatty wasn't finished, I couldn't leave. If Lu Jinyang urged me, I would tell him to wait. Whether it was the devil refining gourd or the second half of the death scripture, they weren't as important as Fatty's life. I thought that I would have to wait for a few more days, but I didn't expect that on the afternoon of the second day, after I made up my mind. When I went downstairs to eat with Zhang Qianwen and the others, the sound-transmitting talisman that had been silent for many days suddenly rang. The strange sound came from the sound-transmitting talisman that I had made myself. After I had made this talisman, I had only given it to Fatty, Zhang Qianwen, and Xia Lu. Now that Zhang Qianwen and Xia Lu were by my side, the only one who could send me a message was Fatty. I hurriedly took out the sound-transmitting talisman. After injecting my true essence into it, Fatty's message appeared on the light screen. His message was very short, only 4 words. Come to my room. Something happened to Fatty. When I saw these words, my first reaction was that something had happened to Fatty. I didn't care about Zhang Qianwen and the others, so I ran upstairs. I wasn't the only one who was worried about Fatty's behavior in the past few days. Zhang Qianwen and the others felt the same way. When I saw the message, I didn't hide it from them. After seeing the message and my reaction, Zhang Qianwen and the others quickly caught up. When they reached Fatty's door, they finally caught up to me. Zhang Qianwen moved next to me and asked, "What happened?" I shook my head, my heart in a mess. I didn't answer and raised my hand to knock on Fatty's door. I knocked on the door for half a minute, but there was no response. This made me even more anxious, and I was even more certain that something had happened to Fatty. Otherwise, he wouldn't have called me to come over and not open the door for me. The problem now was that I wanted to barge in, but I was worried that it would affect Fatty in some way. While I was hesitating, Zhang Qianwen made the decision for me. He pulled me behind him, raised his leg, and kicked the tightly shut door. With a loud thud, Fatty's door was kicked open by Zhang Qianwen. As the saying goes, being concerned makes one confused. This thud made me sober up. Since Fatty had encountered a problem and had sent me a message, of course he was no longer in his meditation state. I wouldn't affect him if I went in. Moreover, even if he was still in his meditation state, I had to come in. I had to choose the lesser of 2 evils. This was the most basic principle. After my mind cleared, I didn't think too much and dashed in. It was different from the last time I had come here. Today, Fatty's room was gloomy. It was sunny outside, but there were no lights in the room. Moreover, the curtains were closed, and not a single ray of light could enter the room. I urged my true essence and used the power of Heavenly Dipper 9 steps. Immediately, the gloominess in the room disappeared. I looked around. Fatty wasn't on the bed, nor was he on the sofa. After searching for a while, Zhang Qianwen and I found Fatty by the window. Chapter 659. I didn't have time to think and dashed toward the Fatty. When I reached him, Zhang Qianwen turned on the lights in the room. At the same time, I flipped the Fatty's body over. Under the bright light, the Fatty's face appeared in front of me. My mind was bewildered. First of all, it was dirty. It was obvious that the Fatty hadn't cleaned himself up in the past 10 days. His hair was a mess, and his face was full of beard. He looked like he had aged 20 years. If that was all, I wouldn't have worried too much. What frightened me more was that the corners of his mouth, nostrils, eyes, and even his ears were bleeding. His 7 orifices were bleeding. It couldn't have happened without severe injuries. As I was bewildered, I even forgot some basic knowledge. I felt my scalp go numb. My voice trembled as I slapped the Fatty's face and called his name. In fact, the Fatty's current situation wasn't good. The best way was to confirm if he was still alive and then inject him with true essence to nourish him. However, I had forgotten about my true essence. There was only one thing in my mind. The fatty was my brother, my playmate since I was young. Ever since I started cultivating and my parents had died, besides Lao AI, I only had the fatty by my side. Moreover, unlike Tao Wu, fatty was my playmate since I was young. A few days ago, when I returned to my hometown, I carefully thought about it. I could only vaguely remember some names and faces in the entire village. From beginning to end, only Fatty and Uncle Lin were my witnesses since I was young. They were people from the same hometown as me. How could the Fatty die? How could he die? As my emotions surged, I shook the Fatty harder and harder. It was a dangerous move for the Fatty in his current situation. However, I didn't notice it at all. I felt like I was possessed. Luckily, Jean Camlin was here. I didn't know when he had come to my side, but he reached out and grabbed both of my arms. Thus, I stopped shaking the fat man. Jean Camlin's voice resounded in my dazed head. "Don't panic. I'm not sure about his situation. Let me check." Then, he pushed me away from the fatty without any hesitation and moved closer to me. With my current level of cultivation, even if Jean Canwin was at his peak and used the Song of Morality, he wouldn't be my opponent, let alone the fact that Jean Canwin's level had dropped to the pressure point realm. Even if he was at his peak and used the ancient book of the Song of Morality, he wouldn't be my opponent. But in her confusion, she could only rely on her body's instincts. She was pushed to the side by Jean Canwin and stared blankly at him. Jean Canwin bent down and searched the fatty's body. After a while, he turned around and said to me, "The fatty isn't dead. I'll instill doubt energy into him. You instill doubt energy into him too." Fatty wasn't dead. His words were like the sound of nature, causing my body to shiver. My brain also woke up from my stupor. After being stunned for a moment, I rushed forward and grabbed the fatty's arm. At this time, Jean Kenwin grabbed the fatty's other arm and was transferring Dao Qi into his body. However, he only had the pressure point realm, and the Dao Qi in his body was limited. After a while, the fatty didn't have any reaction. After I started to pour my true essence into his body, the fatty's condition suddenly took a turn for the better. His greenish-black complexion gradually recovered some of its rosy color, and his originally thin breathing also became a bit heavier. I exhaled, but I didn't dare to let my guard down. I carefully controlled the true essence and continued to transfer it into the fatty's body. After another 15 minutes, when the fatty's breathing stabilized, Jean Canwin stopped transferring Dao Qi. He gently put down the fatty's arm and raised his hand to wipe his sweat. He said to me, "It shouldn't be a big problem. You should also stop for a while. Let's carry him to the bed." At this time, I was much calmer. I knew that the fatty's life wasn't in danger, so I stopped transferring true essence and didn't let Jean Canwin carry him with me. Instead, I extended my hand and sent a flow of true essence to wrap around the fatty. I gently lifted him up and placed him on the bed. Jean Canwin waited for the fatty to lie down. Perhaps it was because he didn't show any signs of waking up, but Jean Canwin said to me, "You stay here and look after him. I'll go get some water and a towel to clean up the blood on his face." I raised my head to take a look. The bloodstains on the fatty's face were indeed a horrible sight, so I nodded. After Jean Camlin left, I looked at the fatty's face as I thought about what had happened. From the time I received the fatty's message to when Jean Canwin and I arrived at his room, it had only been 1 to 2 minutes. The fatty was lying on the ground with blood flowing from his 7 orifices. Something must have happened during this period of time. I originally thought that the fatty had met with some danger and urgently called me to save him. However, from the situation in the room, no one else had appeared. Moreover, I'd already used my clear insight power to investigate. There wasn't anything hidden in the room, nor were there any fluctuations of Tao techniques. My power wasn't too high, but when I was in the glory of consciousness realm, I had already used my clear insight power to investigate some things in the Heavenly Master realm. Now that I had the cultivation base of a Heavenly Master, if I used my clear insight power, I was confident that no one below the Yang God Heavenly Master could escape my detection. I didn't sense anything. This proved that either the danger the fatty was facing wasn't from an external enemy, or the enemy's power was far beyond the young god. I didn't need to think too much to rule out the second possibility. If the enemy's power was beyond the young god level, why would he sneak into the fatty's room to harm him? Or, after hurting the fatty, there was no need for him to leave in a hurry. The only possibility was that there was no external enemy. Based on this judgment and the fact that the fatty had been testing something these days, I could roughly confirm that something had happened to the fatty. Thus, I could roughly confirm that something had happened to the fatty during the testing process. But if that was the case, why did the fatty call me over in a hurry? I pondered in my head. Around 10 days ago, the fatty had told me that he had experienced a huge event. Although he didn't understand it, it was extremely terrifying. Whenever the thought popped up in his head, his body would start to shiver and his heart would palpitate. The fatty's current situation must have something to do with the testing. From the way he had called me over in a hurry, I had reason to believe that he had tested something and couldn't wait to tell me. That was why he had called me to his room. The fatty had told me before that the Tao of divination was different from the other methods. It was a technique to pry into the secrets of the heavens. The secrets of the heavens were hard to find. It was much more heaven-defying than the people of metaphysics, who sought the dragon's acupoints and cultivated themselves in order to ascend. Often, if they weren't careful, they would pry into something that the heavenly way didn't want to show or to try to cover up. The result that awaited them was the wrath of the heavens. If it was as I had guessed, the fatty had encountered the wrath of the heavens. His current situation was already a blessing in disguise. If the thing he had tested had been a little deeper, or if he had taken a step further, there would only be one ending for him: death by the wrath of the heavens. While my heart was palpitating, I was also curious about what the fatty had tested that could lead to such a result. Also, why had he called me to his room in such a hurry after he had tested something? After thinking about it carefully, there were only two possibilities. The first was that after the fatty had tested the secrets of the heavens, he knew that he would receive the wrath of the heavens. Since the heavens were related to me, he wanted me to come over before he died and tell me what he had found. The second possibility was that the fatty had simply called me to save him. The fatty had always been as timid as a mouse, but I was sure that joining him would put me in an extremely dangerous situation. He definitely wouldn't drag me into it. Thus, the second possibility could be eliminated. The only possibility was the first. Based on the first possibility, the thing that the fatty had hurriedly wanted to tell me must have been extremely important. It was so important that he didn't even care about his own life. Thus, even under such circumstances, the fatty wouldn't have given up so easily. Even if he had to die, he would have told me something. Thus, he would have definitely left something behind. With that in mind, I searched the room again. Everything here was exactly the same as the last time I had left. The bed and the sofa were all messy. There wasn't anything out of the ordinary. After looking left and right for a long time, my gaze finally stopped at the window. It was also the place where the fatty had collapsed. Chapter 660. Looking at the bloodstains on the ground, I closed my eyes and tried to guess how the fat man got hurt. The fat man wasn't a gloomy person, and he didn't have the habit of hiding in a dark room during his divination. It was possible that the fat man had hurried to close the curtains before he got hurt. Considering my previous speculation, the fat man had hurried to close the curtains because he didn't want the heavenly law to find out what he had done during his divination. That was why he thought he could avoid the heavenly law's punishment by closing the curtains. But when he found out that he was still hurt, he tried his best to leave something behind. If the fat man had left something behind, it would be near the window. With this thought in mind, I paced back and forth in front of the window. I carefully checked the curtains, the window sill, and even the sofa near the window. However, I didn't find anything. At this moment, Jean Canwin came back with a basin of water in his hand. Xia and Lu followed behind him. When they saw me frowning, they didn't come to greet me. Instead, they surrounded the fat man and helped Zhang Qinwen wipe the bloodstains on the fat man's face. With them taking care of the fat man, I felt more at ease. I stood by the windowsill and continued to search. There was a sofa by the wall next to the windowsill. I walked around the sofa a few times, but didn't find anything strange. However, I accidentally stepped on the sound, transmitting talisman the fat man had left on the floor. I bent down to pick up the talisman to see if there was anything on it. After all, the fat man had taken the talisman at the last moment. It was possible that he had left a mark on it. However, when I picked up the talisman and was about to get up, I saw something wrong with the sofa. The sofa was placed against the wall. Since the rooms on the second floor of the shop had the same layout, I remembered it clearly. However, from the angle I had picked up the talisman, I could see that the sofa had been moved a little bit. The angle wasn't big, and it was almost impossible to see it from other angles. The fat man wasn't a hard-working man. If there was nothing important, he wouldn't have touched the sofa. I could tell from the pile of dirty clothes on the sofa. After I stood up, I noticed a pile of dirty clothes on the sofa. Some of them had fallen to the ground, which made me even more sure of my guess. I've been to Fatty's room before, and I've seen this pile of dirty clothes, but at that time, the clothes were still on the sofa and not on the floor. So Fatty must have touched the sofa. I put away the sound-transmitting talisman, walked over, and moved the sofa away. As the sofa moved, a line of scarlet words appeared on the white wall under the windowsill. Under the illumination of the room's light, I saw it. Encountering the yang brings danger. Seeking the yin brings protection. These 8 words were obviously written in blood, and the blood hadn't dried up yet. I could imagine that the fatty was in a critical situation and didn't have a second choice. He used his own blood to keep these words. But what did these 8 words mean? What information did Fatty get from his divination? Encountering the yang brings danger. Seeking the yin brings protection. He repeated these words over and over again as countless thoughts appeared in his mind. Fatty had said before that his divination had something to do with the deity chase between me and Lu Jinyang. So, these 8 gathas could very well be referring to the deity chase. Lu Jinyang's name had the word yang in it. So, encountering the yang brings danger could very well mean that encountering Lu Jinyang would mean encountering danger. This was something that could be confirmed. Ever since I met Lu Jinyang, every time I met him, I would end up encountering danger. Even encountering him at the Heavenly Grand Ritual was no exception. Although he didn't attack me openly, he left behind the deity chase as a prelude. I had long understood that Lu Jinyang and I wanted to devour each other's flesh and blood. The hatred between us was so deep that there was no possibility of reconciliation. And for this deity chase, the reason why he invited me was because he had a use for me. But once he no longer needed me, he would still kill me if he had the chance. So, even without the fatty's divination, I knew that this was something that was bound to happen. The first 4 words were easy to understand, but I couldn't understand the last 4 words. I had no clue at all. The meaning of the word you was the same as bless, meaning protection, protection. So, the meaning of the 4 words was that as long as one could find yin, they would receive protection and protection. This was not hard to understand, but what I couldn't understand was the word yin. Yin was the antithesis of yang. This was a very simple logic. Even people who didn't understand feng shui would understand this point. It was just that the word yin itself had many meanings. To put it simply, for example, yin spirits. On my body, there were 2 yin spirits, Tong Tong and the snake spirit. The snake spirit was a spirit body, so it could be considered yin. Tong Tong was also a ghost, and was of natural birth, so he could also be considered yin. Could it be that with the snake spirit and Tong Tong, I would receive protection? If that was the case, then it was too simple. And from the word search in front, it was probably not that simple. The snake spirit and Tong Tong were on my body, so I didn't need to search for them. After thinking for a long time, I still couldn't figure it out. At this moment, Zhang Kanwen had cleaned up the fat man. He walked to me and said, "I've checked him." The fat man's mind was exhausted, and his spirit was damaged. That's why he lost consciousness with blood flowing from his 7 orifices. He just needs a good rest, and he will wake up in less than 3 days. However, I'm afraid he won't be able to use his spirit for a while. He can only slowly recover. After hearing that the fat man's body was fine, I felt a little better. I nodded to Jean Canwin to show that I understood. However, my mind was still on the 8 words. Jean Canwin felt a little strange as he saw me staring at the back of the sofa. He walked around the sofa and walked to the wall. Then he saw the 8 words. The 8 words were written in blood. When Jean Canwin saw them, he also felt strange. After a while, he asked me, "Did the fat man write this? What does it mean?" I shook my head. It's true that the fat man wrote it. It seems to be related to me, but I don't know what it means. Encountering Yang brings danger. Seeking Een brings protection. While Jean Canwin was reading the words, he looked pensive and kept repeating them. Who would have thought that as soon as he read them, a golden light suddenly appeared outside the window that was covered by the curtain. It directly went through the window and the curtain. It didn't make a sound, but it directly floated in, heading toward the blood words that Fatty Chong had written on the wall. As soon as the golden light and the blood words touched each other, a violent reaction occurred. First, the blood words rolled on the white wall. Then, a golden flame appeared in the golden light, starting from the first word, burning fiercely. There seemed to be a transparent white light circulating around the bloody words. At first, it was able to resist a few times, but after a while, the white light was extinguished. Then, the bloody words were burned by the golden flames and turned into nothingness. The bloody words disappeared one by one until the last protect word was burnt to ashes. The golden light suddenly turned into a golden longsword, carrying an unparalleled aura as it swept towards me. In an instant, I felt a pressure, but also a familiar feeling. In the dream when I broke through to the glory of Knowledge Realm, and in the Fire God Temple when Swan and I was taken away, I had felt this aura more than once. At that time, I wasn't clear about it, but now I completely understood. This was the aura of the heavens. The golden light arrived in the blink of an eye. The golden flame seemed to have ignited the air. As I breathed, every breath of air that entered my body brought with it a burning sensation, making it hard for me to breathe. Under such pressure, even I, who was close to the late stage of the seal realm, found it hard to bear, let alone Jean Canwin. At that moment, the Tao energy origin stones in his body had all collapsed. His power was only at the complete acupoint pressing realm. The difference between us was huge. I turned to look at him. At that moment, Jean Canwin's face was as pale as paper, and his eyes were unfocused. If he stayed under the heavens' pressure for a few more minutes, he would probably collapse. Chapter 661. I was well aware of the power of the Way of Heaven. If it displayed the kind of pressure that I had seen before, even Lu Jinyang, or someone stronger, wouldn't be able to resist it, let alone me. However, this golden flame was triggered by the fat man. I estimated that the pressure was only at the Yang spirit realm, which gave me a chance to counterattack. After understanding this, I didn't hold back anymore. After summoning the Celestial Master Seal, I activated it with all my might, forming an image of 4 feet and 5 inches in the air. The 4 words "innate saint" were revealed without any concealment. It released a brilliant light that protected me and Jean Canwin. The golden flame finally arrived in front of us, but it was blocked by the seal's barrier. It couldn't move an inch forward, and ripples appeared on the barrier. With the barrier's obstruction, Jean Canwin felt much better. He took a few deep breaths to stabilize his breathing. Then he asked me in horror, "What is this?" "Divine retribution." Under the pressure of the golden flame, I didn't dare to turn my head and answered him with my back facing him. Jean Canwin was a cultivator as well, so he naturally knew what heavenly wrath meant. When he heard this, his eyes instantly widened, and after being stunned for a few breaths of time, he seemed to have reacted and asked in shock, "Is it because of the words left behind by the fatty? What do these words mean? How could they attract divine retribution?" I shook my head and didn't reply. I didn't know what the fat man had found, but I knew that the appearance of this divine retribution had something to do with me. The fat man's target was me, so he attracted this thing. At this time, the golden flame was still strong. Under its pressure, The barrier released by the seal gradually melted. At this time, there wasn't much left. If I didn't do anything, it wouldn't be long before the barrier disappeared, and Zhang Kanwan would be in danger again. Thus, I gathered my true chi and activated the Heavenly Spirit 9 steps. The power of the Way of Heaven couldn't be underestimated. Even if it only revealed the tip of the iceberg today, it was worth my full effort. As I moved, the golden flame seemed to respond. All of a sudden, its body expanded several times. Under the dazzling golden light, the window and curtains on the side were instantly melted. I felt my chest tighten as if I'd been struck by lightning. My body fell back a few steps. This was the might of the heavenly Tao. Even if it's just the power of the Yang spirit, I feel that it's far more powerful than the Yang spirit practitioners in the heavenly grand ritual, even stronger than Lu Jianyang. Looking at the golden ball of light that looked like a huge sun, I felt despair. But very quickly, I shook my head to clear my head. Under the might of the heavenly Tao, humans would instinctively feel fear and despair, but I can't despair, and I can't be overwhelmed. Back then, when the Loho star appeared, I heard that voice say, "Wisdom can cross the river, ignorance can cross the river, sages can cross the river, bandits can cross the river, butchers can cross the river, dogs can cross the river, only I can't cross the river." Back then, I didn't know where that voice came from, but now I know that that voice was the heavenly Tao. It's just that I'm not convinced. Everyone in the world can cross the river, so why can't I cross the river? In the Fire God Temple, the voice borrowed the mouth of the silver-eyed man and said that Swan and I was a ghost and could not have intercourse with me. It even forcibly took Swan and I away. In the end, it was Swan and I who paid the price of not being able to make any progress in his cultivation for 1,000 years in exchange for a chance for me and my wife to meet once every 6 months. Now, the fatty had only tested a few things, but he had incurred the wrath of the heavens and was about to be killed. I didn't know what the heavenly Tao was, but I knew that those who imprisoned me, kidnapped my wife, and hurt my friends are definitely my enemies. The Celestial Master Seal originally had the ability to increase one's strength. In addition to the amplification effect of the Heavenly Spirit 9 steps, my strength wasn't inferior to that of a cultivator who had just entered the Yang spirit realm. Against the tip of the iceberg of the heavenly Tao, it wasn't that I didn't have the strength to fight. At that moment, Zhang Kanwan was still enveloped by my seal. In the following battle, I had no time to be distracted. Thus, I first separated a wisp of true yuan and sent Zhang Kanwan out of the house. Then, I turned around to face the golden light. I didn't have many methods to deal with divine punishment. I could only risk my life. Taking a deep breath, I directly raised my Celestial Master Seal and bombarded the golden light. The Celestial Master Seal was the foundation of the Celestial Master Seal, and it was also the key to entering the Yang spirit realm. Once it was damaged, it often took years to slowly recover. Therefore, during a battle, unless there was a great disparity in strength, or there was no other way, very few people would directly use the seal. At that moment, among the powers that I could control, the strongest was nothing more than the seal above my head and the Xian Yuan sword in my chest. Between the two, the Xian Yuan sword, which had been nurtured for more than half a month, was the strongest. However, no matter how strong it was only equivalent to the power of the Yang spirit. Once I used it and couldn't damage the golden light, I would be at the mercy of others. Therefore, I couldn't directly take out the Xian Yuan sword. Instead, I had to use other methods to first wear down the power of the golden light, and then use the Xian Yuan sword to complete the final blow. In this way, there was a possibility of defeating the golden light. Under such circumstances, I had no other choice but to take the risk of damaging the seal and take the initiative to bombard the golden light. Fortunately, my Celestial Master Seal was different from others. Not only did it have 2 colors, but it was also abnormally strong. I had tried it before, but the Celestial Master Seal was still shiny after being bombarded, without the slightest damage. This was also the reason why I took the initiative to attack the seal. After attacking the seal, I didn't even have time to look at the result. Instead, I focused on the Xian Yuan sword. I was prepared to wait for the seal to wear down the golden light a little, and then directly take out the Xian Yuan sword to complete the final blow. The Xian Yuan sword, which had been nurtured by the sword nurturing technique, was originally my greatest reliance in Jiulu, but now it seemed that I couldn't wait for that time. Soon, my celestial master's seal collided with the golden light ball. The seal was an item of my name. In an instant, I, who was in the distance, felt as if I was in a sea of fire. I felt an indescribable burning sensation all over my body, making me almost unable to speak. The spiritual qi in my body also melted a lot in an instant. I didn't care about the pain in my body. I knew that if I hesitated, I might not even have the chance to fight. But just as I was about to take out the Xian Yuan sword, I suddenly felt that the spiritual qi in my body seemed to have recovered a little. I raised my head to look. Although the seal that was wrapped in the fireball was trembling, it wasn't damaged at all. Moreover, it seemed to be absorbing the light around it. On the seal, other than the original black and white colors, there was also a tinge of gold. I was stunned. After a long time, I finally reacted. My seal was absorbing the power of the heavenly punishment. I had long known that seals had the power to devour. Previously in the old village, the seals of the 3 celestial masters from Dragon Tiger Mountain had been suppressed by my celestial master seal and subsequently devoured. The seal was formed from the celestial master's cultivation, and its essence was power. My celestial master seal could absorb it and convert it into its own power. At the end of the day, the heavenly punishment in front of me was also a kind of power. If my seal could absorb it and convert it into my own power, then not only would I be able to resolve this dangerous situation, but I would also be able to save my life and increase my power. If I could really devour the heavenly punishment and convert it into my own power, then, in a sense, I would be able to control the power of the heavenly punishment. I knew that this idea was crazy, but at this time, the seal had automatically started to devour. Under the isolation of the heavenly punishment's golden light, I couldn't call the seal back. Either the heavenly punishment's golden light would destroy the seal, or the seal would devour the heavenly punishment's golden light. In the end, there could only be one result. After pondering for a while, I gritted my teeth and stopped controlling the Xian Yuan sword. I gathered all the spiritual qi in my body into the seal and supported it to devour the golden light. Just now, I had underestimated the heavenly punishment's golden light. Looking at the current situation, even if I took out the Xian Yuan sword, I wouldn't be able to completely destroy the heavenly punishment's golden light. After all, I had only nurtured the Xian Yuan sword for half a month. Nurturing a sword required a long period of nurturing and accumulation. In just half a month, I wouldn't be able to use my full power. Chapter 662. As I poured more and more true essence into the seal's devouring power became stronger. The golden lines on the seal also became thicker and bigger. However, the strange thing was that the power of the golden light didn't seem to weaken. Instead, it was getting stronger. Gradually, I started to feel that I couldn't do what I wanted. The burning sensation on my body became more intense. Big drops of sweat rolled down my forehead. I couldn't help but take a few steps back. I was getting further and further away from the golden light. I was frightened, but I quickly got rid of these distracting thoughts. The seal was continuously devouring the power of the golden light. Thus, the golden light couldn't be getting stronger. The only explanation was that it was just bluffing. After understanding this, I didn't hesitate anymore. I continued to urge all the true essence in my body to resist the burning sensation. I continued to manipulate the seal to crazily devour the power. As the speed of devouring increased, the golden light on the seal also became stronger. Although I was far away and couldn't touch the seal, I could feel that the seal was burning hot. It was even trembling as if it couldn't bear the power of the divine punishment. After cultivating for so many years, my mind had been tempered. Since I had made up my mind, I couldn't change it. Thus, I didn't have the intention to retreat. I clenched my teeth and persevered. As time passed, The golden light of the divine punishment in front of me continued to grow. It was originally as big as a basketball, but now it had become a golden ball of light with a diameter of 2 meters. There was a golden flame burning inside, just like a lamp wick. The flame continued to rise, as if it would never be extinguished. It carried the power of the heavens and the will to burn everything. The burning sensation on my body became stronger and stronger, and the pressure on my body also increased. Even when the true essence in my body was almost exhausted, the power of the divine punishment was still extremely strong. I continued to clench my teeth and transferred the true dragon energy from the jade bracelet. Instantly, I circulated it in my body, turning it into true essence to continuously replenish what I had consumed. As my true essence recovered little by little, the pressure on my body decreased. At this moment, the golden ball of light suddenly trembled and stopped growing. Although the ball of light was still as dazzling as the sun, and the golden flame was still burning fiercely, I could see a trace of weakness. That gave me a little bit of respite. Of course, I wouldn't really stop to catch my breath. I only slowed down the speed at which I circulated my true essence and divided my attention to raise both of my hands. As my fingertips moved, I constantly formed hand seals. The consumption of activating the seal and the true essence in my body temporarily reached a balance. As for the true dragon chi from the jade bracelet, it was drawn out by me. After it was converted into true essence in my body, it continuously surged to my fingertips and was continuously consumed as I changed the hand seals. This is the hand seal that I comprehended after using the sage's seal to devour the seals of the 3 ox-nosed Taoists. Through these hand seals, I can unleash the sage seal's devouring power to the extreme. This was also the biggest reason why I chose to continue devouring the golden light of the god's punishment after seeing the seal actively absorb it. I hooked my pinky and closed my thumb. With the last movement of this set of hand seals, the shaman chi and Taoist chi in my body suddenly surged and turned into a ray of light. Like an arrow that had left the bow, it flew out from my fingertips and pierced the golden light of the god's punishment, landing directly on my sage seal. As soon as the two came into contact, the 4 inscriptions on the seal seemed to have come to life. They separated from the seal and floated into the air, even breaking free from the god's punishment's golden light. Natural-born sage. The 4 ancient seal characters that had originally condensed on my sage seal expanded several times in size in the air after breaking free from the golden light. They suddenly turned around and charged towards the golden light again. Due to their huge size, they didn't pierce into the golden light this time. Instead, they enveloped the entire god's punishment's golden light. The aura of the god's punishment's golden light instantly stagnated. Immediately after, the golden flames in the center seemed to have been stimulated and rose abruptly, occupying the entire god's punishment's golden light. It burned the 4 ancient characters that were surrounding it and started to retaliate fiercely. The power of the god's punishment was naturally not something that the 3 ox-nosed Taoists could compare to. I didn't know how much the power of the golden flames had affected the 4 ancient characters, but the power of the golden flames was reflected on my body through the connection between me and the seal. It was so painful that I almost screamed. The high temperature was almost irresistible. It burned my flesh and blood, and even my soul. At that moment, I almost stopped activating the seal. Just at that moment, Zhang Kanwen, who I had sent out earlier, suddenly rushed into the room. He looked at me and then at the golden light that was connected to the fireball. He didn't speak, but took out the ancient book of the Song of Righteousness. At that moment, I could clearly feel Zhang Kanwen's aura rising behind me. In just half a breath's time, his cultivation had reached the pinnacle of the acupoint sealing realm and crossed over to the glory of knowledge realm, directly reaching the celestial master realm. The ancient book of the Song of Righteousness had the ability to help one reach the celestial master realm in a short period of time. However, every time it was used, there would be one less page. This was a treasure that had been passed down in Mount Wen's lineage for a long time. It was also Zhang Kanwen's most powerful technique. I had once seen this secret technique of his in the Yinshang royal tomb. I knew that it wasn't ordinary, and I also knew how precious the ancient book of the Song of Righteousness was. When I returned and saw Zhang Kanwen, I saw that the ancient book of the Song of Righteousness was scattered on the floor. There were only a few pages left. I didn't expect him to activate this secret technique again. As his cultivation rose to the celestial master realm, Zhang Kanwen obviously had a certain level of resistance towards the pressure of the god's punishment's golden light. He quickly came to my side and formed a seal with both of his hands. He shouted at the golden fireball, "Pardon!" Immediately, there was a golden line of fire that shot towards his body from the golden fireball. I had to say that Zhang Kanwen's mind was very sharp. After he came in, even though he didn't know the situation, he could tell that I couldn't withstand the pressure from the god's punishment's golden light. Hence, he didn't directly attack the golden light, but try to help me bear the pressure. However, his celestial master power was supported by the ancient book of the Song of Righteousness. He wasn't a celestial master and didn't even have the celestial master seal. It would definitely be more difficult for him to bear the power of the god's punishment. I resisted the pain in my body and struggled to look at Zhang Kanwen. I wanted to stop him, but under the pressure of the god's punishment, I couldn't utter a single word. I opened my mouth, but couldn't utter a single word. Very quickly, the golden light from the god's punishment's golden light fell on his body. Zhang Kanwen's body shook. His entire body seemed to have been struck by lightning, and his face instantly turned red. At the same time, the pressure on my body suddenly lightened. The state that I was in previously on the verge of collapse also disappeared. With the replenishment of the true dragon's energy from the jade bracelet, I quickly suppressed the pain in my body. I quickly turned to look at Zhang Kanwen. Just as I had expected, Zhang Kanwen was much more uncomfortable facing the god's punishment's power than I was. Moreover, with his power, even if he wanted to help me, he wouldn't be able to do so for long. He would definitely be severely injured. In reality, the time that Zhang Kanwen lasted was shorter than I had expected. When I turned my head, I saw that his face was filled with blood. There were a few lines of blood flowing out from his ears, eyes, and nostrils. If this continued, even if I could swallow the god's punishment, Zhang Kanwen definitely wouldn't be able to last until then. Thus, I clenched my teeth and turned my head. I violently circulated the true essence in my body, urging the celestial master seal to frantically swallow the god's punishment's golden light. Zhang Kanwen had already interfered, and I couldn't stop him. I could only try to absorb the god's punishment's power as quickly as possible to relieve the pressure on him. Under my control, the god's punishment's power and the golden line between me and the celestial master seal suddenly expanded. From the golden line of fire, it turned into a bright yellow pillar of fire that shot straight at me. After being converted by the celestial master seal, the violent power was transferred into my body. Even so, the might of the god's punishment's power suppressed me to the point that I couldn't move or even speak. If I was already in such a state, I really couldn't imagine what kind of pain Zhang Kanwen, who didn't have the celestial master seal, had to face this power head-on. At that moment, the god's punishment's true essence was pushed to its limits. Under the effects of my celestial master seal, it turned into two rays of light, one black and one white. They continuously flickered, helping me resist the god's punishment. As time passed, the god's punishment's golden light became weaker and weaker. It was destined to be swallowed by me. However, Zhang Kanwen, who was at the side, had blood flowing out of his 7 orifices. He didn't even have the strength to open his eyes. He was only relying on his last bit of willpower to stand there, continuing to share the god's punishment's power with me. Chapter 663. As time passed, Zhang Kanwen and the golden light didn't appear. However, my heavenly master seal suddenly made a cracking sound. Could it be that the seal couldn't take it anymore? I was shocked. I lifted my head and saw that there were many cracks on the outer shell of the Heavenly Master Seal. Before I could react, the cracks spread further. In the end, the outer layer of the seal completely shattered. However, the strange thing was that the shattered particles didn't scatter. They still wrapped around the seal. Moreover, the golden light that the seal absorbed from the light became even more dazzling. Finally, under the effect of the golden light, the shattered particles gathered on the seal. Then, the seal started to expand at a speed visible to the naked eye. From the initial size of 4 feet and 5 inches, it grew to 4 feet and 6 inches, 7 inches, 8 inches. Only when it reached 5 feet and 3 inches did the change in the seal start to slow down. The increase in the size of the seal was a sign that the Heavenly Master Seal had become stronger. As the size of the seal stabilized at 5 feet and 5 inches, I felt a surge of power coming from a seal, which instantly reduced the pressure on me. The golden light of the Heavenly Master Seal had been struggling to hold on. As time passed, the situation became clearer. I didn't even need to do anything. I just needed the seal's power to absorb the golden light of the Heavenly Master Seal. However, I couldn't just sit there and do nothing. Jean Camlin was still struggling to hold on. In order to make him suffer less, I didn't have the intention to relax. I continued to urge the seal to absorb the golden light of the Heavenly Master Seal. As I moved, the flames that had been shooting at me, like a pillar, started to grow crazily. They almost reached the thickness of an arm as they surged towards me. In an instant, the pressure around me that had just decreased increased explosively again. However, this time, no matter how crazy the flames were, they couldn't make me collapse. The light ball formed by the golden light of the Heavenly Master Seal gradually shrunk and returned to the size of a basketball. At this moment, the situation had completely turned around. Jean Camlin and I had worked hard to absorb the Heavenly Master Seal that had severely injured the fatty. Not only was I not injured, but my power had also increased by a lot. I couldn't help but feel a trace of joy in my heart. However, after Jean Camlin's miserable shriek, the smile that I had just revealed at the corner of my mouth disappeared. Although I didn't feel any pressure, Jean Camlin's power was much weaker than mine. He was still in danger. Therefore, it was far from time to celebrate. Based on my understanding of Jean Camlin, if he hadn't suffered unbearable pain, he wouldn't have screamed. From this, it could be seen that his situation was extremely dangerous. Not only did he not have a seal, but the Heavenly Master's power that he was displaying now was all because of this song of morality. There was a time limit to the song of morality. Once the time limit was over, Jean Camlin's Heavenly Master cultivation would disappear without a trace, and he would return to his acupoint sealing cultivation. In the past, I heard Jean Camlin say that the ancient scroll of the Song of Morality could probably allow him to maintain his Heavenly Master cultivation base for close to 4 hours. But at that time, he already had the cultivation base of glory of consciousness. At this moment, his cultivation was even lower than before, and he still had to withstand the pressure of the golden light of heaven's punishment. Judging from the scream, it was very likely that he could no longer maintain his cultivation as a celestial master. Using the power of sealing acupoints to shake the might of the heavens, I don't need to think too much to know what the result will be. I struggled to turn my head to look. Looking closely, Jean Camlin was still barely maintaining his Heavenly Master cultivation base, but his aura was continuously dropping. He was already extremely close to glory of consciousness realm. Because I had actively absorbed it, the pressure of the golden light of heaven's punishment was mainly focused on me, but the golden thread that connected Jean Camlin's body didn't break. As long as the golden thread was there, once Jean Camlin's strength dropped below Heavenly Master, the power of heaven's punishment would instantly turn him into dust. My internal organs were burning, and I turned my head once more. I stared at the fireball of heaven's punishment and let out a hysterical shout. Then I walked forward and directly towards the fireball of heaven's punishment. As I walked forward, the golden thread that connected me to the fireball became thicker. When I reached the front of the fireball, The golden thread was already as thick as a person, and it covered my entire body. Instantly, the pressure around me increased, but at the same time, there was a crisp crack. My heavenly master's seal changed again, growing from 5 feet and 5 inches to 1 inch. The enlargement of the seal was the last straw that broke the camel's back. As I activated it, the 4 ancient words "natural saint" shone brightly once more and swallowed the remaining golden light of heaven's punishment. In an instant, the power of heaven's punishment disappeared, and my heavenly master seal was dyed in a layer of gold. At the same time, an abundant power was born from my body, sweeping away all the pressure in my surroundings. Heaven's punishment was finally swallowed. I was worried about Jean Camlin's situation, so I didn't have time to be happy. I quickly turned around and looked at Jean Camlin. The disappearance of heaven's punishment allowed me to regain my freedom. As for Jean Camlin, his body fell softly the moment the heaven's punishment disappeared. Seeing this, I quickly lifted my feet to walk towards him. But before I could reach him, Jean Camlin moved on his own. He twisted his body and used his hands to support himself on the ground. Eventually, he straightened his body, bent his legs, and sat cross-legged on the ground. I was bewildered at first, then frowned and looked carefully. I found that his body had a fine flow of Tao energy which was circulating in his body. Instantly, I understood. He wanted to refine the heaven's punishment. Just now, I had used the seal's swallowing power to resist the heaven's punishment. When the heaven's punishment disappeared, all of its power was swallowed by the seal. But Jean Camlin was different. He had used his body to resist the heaven's punishment. Although the heaven's punishment fireball had disappeared, the golden thread had completely entered Jean Camlin's body. After the fireball disappeared, the golden thread became like a rootless duckweed that couldn't cause any damage. I didn't even need to care about it. After a while, it would automatically disappear. However, Jean Camlin didn't think so. He wanted to swallow it and refine it. He was different from me. I had the Heavenly Master's seal, so I had the ability to swallow and refine things. But he was relying on himself to refine the heaven's punishment. I didn't try to refine the heaven's punishment myself, but I could imagine how difficult it would be. So I stood still and didn't dare to move forward. I was afraid that I would disturb him. As for Jean Camlin, after completing those movements, he also calmed down. He placed his hands on his knees and closed his eyes. There was not the slightest expression on his face. He was like an old monk sitting in meditation. His blood-stained face showed neither joy nor sorrow. At first, I was a little worried. I thought that Jean Camlin's actions were too daring and risky. But gradually, I felt a surge of joy in my heart. Jean Camlin was a dragon among men. Whether it was his talent or his temperament, he was the best of the best. Although the heaven's punishment's power was terrifying, the golden light in his body was just the remnant of the heaven's punishment. Moreover, it was the remnant of the heaven's punishment that had been defeated by him and me. So, I had faith in him. I believed that he could refine the heaven's punishment. Ever since the Tao energy source stone in his body had shattered and his strength had fallen to the acupuncture point realm. Although he said that it didn't matter, I could feel the disappointment in his heart. I had been thinking of a way to help him recover his cultivation, but I didn't expect that he would find an opportunity himself before I could find a way. From his current situation, the process of swallowing and refining couldn't be completed in a short period of time. I couldn't help much, so I turned my gaze to the fat man on the bed. Although the battle just now was extremely dangerous, under my intentional control, the area affected was extremely small. The fat man lying on the bed was still breathing evenly and sleeping soundly. He wasn't injured at all. Just as I heaved a sigh of relief, there was movement at the door. Xie Chenghua and Lu Chuanda appeared outside the door. Then, even Wang Kuan came over with little Wang Li. They stood outside the door and looked at the messy room and the burnt things in the room. They were about to step in, but I stopped them. From the current situation, both Jean Camlin and the fat man needed a good rest. After stopping them, I carefully walked out and told them that there was nothing wrong here, so they didn't need to worry. After they left, I returned to the room. On one hand, I took care of the fat man, and on the other hand, I protected Jean Canwin and paid attention to his situation. I first want to check on the fat man. After confirming that he wasn't affected, I was completely relieved. Next, I carefully walked to Jean Canwin's side. Although I couldn't help him refine the heaven's punishment, I could check on his current physical condition. Thus, I used my insight power and looked at Jean Canwin. Chapter 664. With the power of my insight, I could see every part of Jean Canwin's body with a single glance. At first glance, I noticed that there was something wrong with his meridians of the heavens. The meridians of the heavens were where all the power resided in a cultivator's body. Back when I was in the acupuncture realm, my meridians of the heavens were destroyed by Lu Xening. Later on, with the help of the old president, I consumed the saliva of the true dragon to recover. Since then, the toughness of my meridians of the heavens reached a terrifying realm. It was not something that cultivators of the same level could compare to. Because of this, coupled with the filtering effect of the sage's seal, even though the power of the heavenly punishment was brutal, it did not affect me much. It was successfully absorbed and refined by the seal. However, Jean Canwin was different. Even though the Wanshan lineage's inherited sorcery was mystical, the meridians of the heavens were no different from ordinary cultivators. Under the suppression of the power of the heavenly punishment, even though he had withstood it with his strong will, the meridians of the heavens in his body had completely collapsed. At that moment, his broken meridians of the heavens were almost completely shattered. They were in the shape of saw teeth and could not support the circulation of Dao Qi. If he did not repair them quickly, even if he could successfully refine the power of the heavenly punishment, he would not be able to store it in his meridians of the heavens, much less absorb it. Not only that, the meridians of the heavens are the foundation of cultivation. Just like when my meridians of the heavens had collapsed, if Jean Canwin's meridians of the heavens couldn't be repaired, then his cultivation path would have to stop there. I was getting impatient again. What should I do? Back then, I used the saliva of the true dragon to repair the meridians of the heavens. However, the saliva of the true dragon was extremely precious. Back then, I only managed to obtain a drop of it from the dragon meridians of the Metaphysics Association by chance. Ever since then, even though I've seen more than 100 dragon meridians, I have never seen the saliva of the true dragon. Back then, the dragon meridians of the Metaphysics Association had the saliva of the true dragon. I thought that all dragon meridians had it. However, after seeing many dragon meridians over the years, I realized that the saliva of the true dragon was much rarer than the dragon meridians. Only a few of the true dragon meridians of high quality would produce a drop when they were in their decay stage. Where should I go to find the saliva of the true dragon? Wanwu Grotto Heaven. Although they have 4 real dragon veins, when I redistributed the real dragon veins in the Blessed Enclave, I used the insight power to observe that there is no real dragon saliva in the 4 newly distributed real dragon veins of Wanwu Cave. Moreover, I can't contact Wonkin at this time. Even if there's a real dragon vein, it can't save them for a while. However, when I recalled this incident, I remembered that when the Blessed Enclave had redistributed the true dragon's vein, the jade bracelet had absorbed a large amount of true dragon energy. At this moment, the total amount of true dragon energy stored in the jade bracelet far exceeded that of a true dragon's vein of the highest quality. Since the true dragon saliva was formed from the essence of the true dragon vein, theoretically speaking, as long as there was enough true dragon qi, one could achieve the same effect as the true dragon saliva. I glanced at Jean Canwin again and gritted my teeth. Forget it. I'll just treat a dead horse as a living one. Although Jean Canwin wasn't in a hurry to recover his heaven's veins, he was currently refining the heaven's punishment. If he couldn't recover his heaven's veins, then refining the heaven's punishment would be useless. It would be a pity, so I had to help him no matter what. After I had made up my mind, I took out the jade bracelet and quickly transferred the true dragon energy to Jean Canwin's body. At this moment, Jean Canwin's entire mind was focused on resisting the remaining power of the heaven's punishment. He didn't know what was happening around him, and he didn't resist at all. A large amount of true dragon energy flowed out of the jade bracelet and entered Jean Camlin's body. It followed his meridians and gradually gathered in his heaven's veins. The true dragon's veins had a nourishing effect, but the effect wasn't obvious. After entering the heaven's veins, most of the true dragon energy dissipated along with the damaged parts of the heaven's veins, turning into nothingness. Only a small portion of the true dragon energy could continue to move forward along the heaven's veins. During this process, Jean Camlin's heaven's veins started to slowly recover. Fortunately, the true dragon energy in the jade bracelet was very abundant. Even though 99% of the true dragon energy had dissipated, there was still a large amount of true dragon energy that continued to move forward. It followed his heaven's veins and completed a complete circulation. Of course, most of the true dragon energy that had dissipated was absorbed by the jade bracelet. After one circulation, Jean Camlin's heaven's veins didn't change much. After all, the true dragon energy wasn't the same as the true dragon saliva. So, I didn't think too much about it. I continued to urge the true dragon energy to complete the second circulation. Normally, it would take at least 1 to 4 hours to complete one circulation. However, my cultivation was much higher than Jean Camlin's. Under my guidance, I only needed 2 to 3 minutes to complete a complete circulation. After more than 20 circulations, a small portion of the true dragon energy in the jade bracelet had dissipated. Then, I finally saw a visible change in Jean Camlin's heaven's veins. The bottom of the jagged wounds had mostly healed. Only a small part on the top was still in a damaged state. During the process of the true dragon energy circulation, the wounds on the heaven's veins were the main reason for the loss of true dragon energy. Now that the wounds had healed, the gaps were much smaller. Next, the process would be much easier. After another dozen or so circulations, all the wounds on Jean Camlin's heaven's veins had healed. Although the wounds hadn't fully healed, the true dragon energy in the heaven's veins wouldn't leak out. I continued to urge the remaining true dragon energy to nurture it. However, after 2 more circulations, I clearly felt Jean Camlin's motionless body shake. Has he woken up? I hurried to look at Jean Camlin's face. He still had his eyes closed. The muscles on both sides of his cheeks bulged. It seemed that he was gritting his teeth to endure some pain. Soon, I found that there was a small aura in his heaven's veins. It slowly moved up from the bottom of the heaven's vein like a newborn snake. This aura was very weak, but it contained an enormous power. It didn't seem to be the Tao energy of Wenshan's lineage. I used my insight power to look at his heaven's vein. I found that the small snake was emitting a golden light. My heart jumped. Could it be that Jean Camlin had refined the power of the heaven's punishment and turned it into power that he could use? With that thought in mind, I controlled the true dragon energy to stop temporarily. When the small snake swam to another place, I controlled the two to maintain the same speed and continued to nurture the heaven's vein. As the circulation continued, the snake-like aura gradually expanded. It even started to swallow the surrounding true dragon energy. I didn't control it and continued to transfer the true dragon energy from the jade bracelet. After each circulation, the small snake's aura became stronger. At the same time, Jean Camlin's heaven's vein also became stronger. At midnight, Jean Camlin's heaven's vein was completely healed. After that, I didn't need to control the true dragon energy anymore. The small snake had already become extremely huge. It engulfed the surrounding true dragon energy and started to circulate on its own. Seeing that, I finally let out a long breath. Jean Camlin was completely out of danger. Although he hadn't woken up yet, his furrowed eyebrows had relaxed. His expression returned to that of an old monk sitting in meditation. I couldn't tell if he was happy or sad. I crawled up from the ground and walked to the window. I sat on the sofa. I felt extremely tired. From noon until now, I had first discovered that the fatty was unconscious. Then, I had to resist the might of the heaven's punishment. Finally, I had to guide the enormous true dragon energy to complete tens of circulations in Jean Camlin's heaven's vein. My body was already extremely tired. At that moment, the fatty's condition had stabilized and Zhang Kanwen's condition had started to improve. I could finally rest. However, I was destined to be restless. Just as I sat down, Zhang Kanwen, who had just calmed down, started to change again. I quickly looked at his body and saw that his aura had suddenly increased. From the initial acupoint completion, he had reached the peak of acupoint completion. After stopping for a short while, his aura continued to increase, and he had broken through to the glorious consciousness realm. The Tao energy source stone that was originally shattered reformed at the bottom of his vein. 1, 2, 3. Along with the formation of the glorious star, Zhang Kanwen's cultivation swiftly increased. From the initial stage of glorious consciousness to the middle stage, late stage, and finally to the peak of glorious consciousness, it took less than 2 hours. In 2 hours, his cultivation rose from the acupoint completion realm to the peak of glorious consciousness. Such an unbelievable scene was happening right in front of me. Ever since his heaven's veins recovered and that little golden snake-like aura appeared in his body, I knew that Zhang Kanwen must have obtained a great fortune this time in his struggle for survival. But at that time, the biggest assumption I had was that he would recover to his previous 4-star cultivation. No matter what, I didn't expect him to reach the glorious consciousness realm. Just one more step, and he would be in the Sky Master realm. I looked at Zhang Kanwen. He still hadn't opened his eyes. His pale face had turned much rosier as his cultivation recovered. In his vein of the heaven's punishment, the power of the heaven's punishment calmed down and continued to circulate. When it passed through the glorious star at the bottom, it broke down into pure Tao energy and turned into power that Zhang Kanwen could control. Seeing such a situation, I heaved a sigh of relief. The power of the heaven's punishment calmed down, which meant that Zhang Kanwen's cultivation had finally stopped increasing. From the acupoint completion realm, he had reached the glorious consciousness realm and was half a step into the Sky Master realm. Although Zhang Kanwen had gone through a lot today, in the end, he had broken through and obtained huge benefits. The heavens didn't let him down. Chapter 665. A tremendous power suddenly appeared from Zhang Kanwen's body and rushed into his veins of the sky with an unstoppable momentum. The tremendous power was much more terrifying than all the power in Zhang Kanwen's veins of the sky. After it rushed into the veins of the sky, it combined with the original true dragon chi. Zhang Kanwen's aura rose again, and his realm seemed to be breaking through again. He was already at the pinnacle of the glorious era. If he continued to break through, he would be able to step out of the chasm between earthly master and celestial master, condense the seal, and become a celestial master. However, I was a little curious. Zhang Kanwen's condition had stabilized, so where did this tremendous force come from? I used my insight power again to look into Zhang Kanwen's veins of the sky. The new tremendous power was also covered in golden light. It seemed to be from the same source as the golden light from the heavenly punishment. I immediately understood that the snake-like aura was only a small portion of the heavenly punishment that Zhang Kanwen had devoured. After Zhang Kanwen refined the heavenly punishment, he didn't release all of it. He only released a small portion to guide the true dragon chi that I had sent into his body. On one hand, it was to nourish the veins of the sky, and on the other hand, it was to let the veins of the sky adapt to the heavenly punishment aura. When the veins of the sky were fully nourished and had adapted to the heavenly punishment aura, he sent most of the remaining heavenly punishment power into the veins of the sky. He was unconscious and didn't know that I was there. He also didn't know that I was using the true dragon veins to nourish the veins of the sky. Therefore, he should be using this method to repair the veins of the sky and absorb the heavenly punishment. I had to admit that Zhang Kanwen was extremely mentally tough. Under such harsh conditions, he had created a chance for himself to level up. Looking at the current situation, even without my help, he could possibly repair the veins of the sky and absorb the heavenly punishment on his own. However, In that case, he would only be able to absorb a portion of the heavenly punishment power. Previously, the veins of the sky were damaged and couldn't withstand too much of the heavenly punishment power. It was difficult to repair the veins of the sky with the snake-like aura alone. It was also difficult to make the veins of the sky tough enough to absorb the remaining heavenly punishment power. It would be great if he could retain a small portion of it. But after I joined them, everything changed. I used a large amount of true dragon chi to completely repair his heavenly veins and made them strong enough to contain the power of heavenly punishment. Not only did he leave the power of the heavenly punishment in his body, but he also relied on the power of the heavenly punishment to absorb even more true dragon chi and convert it into his chi of the way, allowing his cultivation to climb to the peak of the glorious memory. In the end, after the power of the heavenly punishment appeared, it carried all the power from before and charged towards the heavenly master realm. Although there was only a difference of one word between heavenly master and earthly master, the realm that they represented was as different as clouds and mud. After entering the celestial master realm, the Tao Chi in one's body would turn into quintessential essence. With the support of quintessential essence, heavenly master cultivators could use the one-word incantation, condense seals, and even fly for a short period of time. The Geomaster was still in the secular world. After becoming a heavenly master, they had already left the secular world. With so many coincidences, not only did Zhang Kanwen not die today, but he also obtained a great opportunity. I looked at Zhang Kanwen nervously. In his heavenly veins, the last bit of heavenly punishment combined with his original aura and turned into a torrent that flowed rapidly in his heavenly veins and circulated continuously. One cycle, 2 cycles, until there were countless cycles. Under the continuous circulation of the heavenly punishment, the chi of the way in Zhang Kanwen's body was quickly compressed. From every corner of the heavenly veins, it gathered around the stars and started to convert chi of the way into quintessential essence. Then, the stars shattered one after another. This was a necessary process to advance to the heavenly master realm. It was also the most painful and unbearable stage in the process. Once one successfully advanced to the heavenly master realm, one would truly enter the next level of cultivation. However, once one failed, many years of cultivation would be wasted, and one's realm would drop to the acupuncture point realm. Whether one would have a chance to advance to the heavenly master realm in the future would depend on one's own luck. 1 star, 2 stars. As the last star shattered, the quintessential essence in Zhang Kanwen's body reached its peak, and the aura in his body reached an unprecedented height. I revolved my quintessential essence to block the pressure that landed on my body. Then, I held my breath and waited for Zhang Kanwen's final step. Time ticked by. I took a deep breath and continued to wait. Gradually, the Taoist chi in Zhang Kanwen's body decreased, but the real essence increased. Finally, at a certain moment, his whole body suddenly trembled. Then, in the dry night sky outside the window, there were suddenly 3 muffled sounds of thunder. 3 claps of thunder, and the heavenly master realm descended. Following the 3 claps of thunder, a cold wind blew in from the window, but it went around me and headed straight for Zhang Kanwen. Recalling the situation when I advanced to the heavenly master realm, Zhang Kanwen's consciousness told me that he had been blown 10,000 meters into the sky by the stainless wind. After the stainless wind, in just a few seconds, Zhang Kanwen's body emitted a thick aura, and he looked completely different from before. I looked into his heaven's meridian. At that moment, there were no traces of chi in his heaven's meridian. There was only a huge ball of air. The ball of air had a golden glow, and it was the quintessential essence that carried the power of heaven's punishment. Gathering quintessential essence, heavenly master realm. At that moment, Zhang Kanwen had successfully advanced to the heavenly master realm. However, he hadn't woken up yet. Instead, the quintessential essence in his body suddenly turned into a huge white wave that gathered above his head. It was obvious that Zhang Kanwen's talent wasn't ordinary. He had just advanced to the heavenly master realm, and he was about to condense a seal. As the quintessential essence gathered above his head, Zhang Kanwen's power leaked out, and it directly flipped the floor near him, revealing a huge hole. In an instant, broken bricks and stones flew everywhere. Fortunately, I was prepared. I revolved my quintessential essence and blocked the stones far away. However, such a huge commotion woke up everyone in the shop. Very quickly, Lu Chuanda, Xie Chenghua, and the others appeared outside the room, and they looked at Zhang Kanwen in shock. The two of them were quite knowledgeable. After a while, Xie Chenghua muttered, This is becoming a heavenly master? The shock on Lu Chuanda's face wasn't any less than his. He nodded blankly, but he couldn't say a word. The two of them had ordinary talent, and their cultivation was already at the peak of glorious consciousness realm. In the past few years, they had completely given up on cultivation and were obsessed with business. However, at that moment, as Zhang Kanwen was about to take that step, the strong envy in their eyes couldn't be hidden. I couldn't care about their feelings, and all my attention was on Zhang Kanwen. I turned my head to signal for them to keep quiet, and then I turned back to continue staring at Zhang Kanwen. At that moment, the quintessential essence above Zhang Kanwen's head finally stopped rumbling, and it started to gather in the middle. In the end, a blurry seal started to form. Heavenly Master Seal. The envy in Xie Chenghua and Lu Chuanda's eyes reached its peak. I also felt a little emotional. Over the years, Zhang Kanwen had suffered countless setbacks, but everything had its own destiny. At that moment, he finally got the right result. As the blurry outline gradually solidified, an ancient heavenly master seal was formally formed. It didn't show the strange phenomenon that I had seen when my seal had formed. Instead, it gradually floated down from Zhang Kanwen's head, slowly falling in front of him and hovering there. The number of words on the seal determined the heavenly master's talent and strength. While I was happy for Zhang Kanwen, I also had a strong curiosity. What word would be on Zhang Kanwen's seal? Generally speaking, if a seal could form a complete word, it meant that the person's talent and strength were extraordinary. Being able to use more than one word was already 1 in 10,000. For me, perhaps it was luck, but I had only seen 2 people condense a seal in my life, and that was Wang Can and I. Both of our seals had 4 words. It wouldn't be an exaggeration to say that this kind of 4-word seal was 1 in 10,000. Even in historical records, it had only appeared a few times. There was also Lu Jinyang, whose seal also had 4 words. His talent wasn't much different from mine. While thinking about this, I craned my head to look at Zhang Kanwen's seal. When I saw it clearly, I couldn't help but feel shocked. Chapter 666. Zhang Kanwen's seal was different from my black and white seal. It wasn't the pure white seal of a normal heavenly master either. Instead, it was mixed with countless tiny golden threads. These golden threads were obviously the power of heavenly punishment. At the bottom of the seal, there were 4 large words that were also formed by golden threads. Righteous Spirit. Looking at the 4 ancient characters, I felt a wave of righteous energy hitting my face. The small seal in front of me seemed to have the phantom of a towering mountain wrapped around it. Along with the appearance of the seal, there was a faint sound of chanting. There is righteousness in heaven and earth, and it gives form to chaos. Below were rivers and mountains, and above were the sun and stars. To the people, it is called vast and boundless, filling up the heavens. The road to the emperor is a barbarian, containing and spitting out the Ming court. At the end of time, I will see, one by one, I will write down my painting. In a trance, I seemed to see a figure with an indomitable spirit. He was wearing a moon-white robe, and he was thin and tall. On his bony hands, there was a prosperous world. Behind his proud and straight back, there was a world of iron horses and golden spears. He stood at the edge of the horizon, looking in this direction from afar. After singing that awe-inspiring song, the corners of his lips curled up, as if he was somewhat gratified. He turned around and disappeared into the boundless world. I didn't know if that phantom was real or not, but I knew that it was Wen Xiang, the ancestor of Zhang Canwen's Wen Shan lineage. The Prime Minister's original name was Wen Tianxiang. His courtesy name was Song Rue, and his courtesy name was Lu Shan. Wen Shan. He was from Jizhou, Jiangxi. He was a statesman, literateur, patriotic poet, and a famous minister who resisted the Yuan dynasty. In the 4th year of Baoyu, he ranked first in the Jinshi. In the 1st year of the Qing dynasty, he was conferred the title of Chengshi Minister and assigned the title of Jidushi of the Ninghai Navy. In the 4th month of the 6th year of the reign of Xianshun, he was appointed as the supervisor of ordnance and minister of the Imperial Academy. Because he drafted an imperial edict that ridiculed the powerful Prime Minister Jia Yi, he was dismissed from his post. In the 1st year of Diyou's reign, the Yuan army moved eastward along the Yangtze River. Wen Tianxiang used his family's wealth to recruit 50,000 soldiers to defend Lin. He was appointed to Zhejiang West and Jiangdong, as well as Pingjiang Prefecture. They sent troops to help Changzhou, but because Huai General Zhang Quan did not come to their rescue, they were defeated and had to retreat to Yuhang. Soon after he was appointed as the right prime minister, who was also the Shumi envoy, he received an order to go to the Yuan army to negotiate peace. Because he denounced the Yuan prime minister, Bo Yin, he was detained and escorted to the north. In the 5th month, in Fuzhou, together with Zhang Shiji, Assistant Minister of Rights Liu Xiufu, Right Prime Minister Chen Yizhong, and the others supported the Prince of Yi Zhaogong as the new emperor. They planned to take the sea route north to Jiangxia, but Chen Yizhong stopped them. Thereupon they went to the southern Jianzhou to gather troops to resist the Yuan. In the 5th month of the 2nd year of Jingyan, he attacked Jiangxi again, but because he was alone, he was forced to retreat to Guangdong. In the 12th month of the 1st year of Xiangxing, he was captured at Wupa Mountain. The following year, Zhang Hongfan, the marshal of the Mongolian and Han armies of the Yuan dynasty, escorted Zhang Shiji to Shao Mountain and ordered him to surrender. Wen Tianxiang refused and wrote the poem Crossing the Ocean to show his determination. Later, he was sent to the capital of the Yuan dynasty. Kublai personally persuaded him to surrender and gave him the position of Prime Minister of the Hall of Governmental Affairs. Wen Tianxiang was righteous and would rather die than submit. On the 9th day of the 12th month in the 19th year of the Yuan dynasty, he died as a martyr in Dadu. The Song of Righteousness, Crossing Zero Dingyang, and other works that Wen Xiang left behind in his life vividly displayed his integrity and pride. This integrity and pride was the sole inheritance of Mount Wen's lineage. Except for Zhang Canwen's uncle, Zhang Bingsheng, the disciples of Mount Wen's lineage were all loyal and righteous people, especially Zhang Canwen. He was completely worthy of the righteous spirit seal. After a long time, the heavenly master seal with golden threads was absorbed into Zhang Canwen's body. Then he slowly opened his eyes. When he saw me, his eyes seemed to be in a daze. I cupped my hands and smiled at him, congratulating him. Congratulations, Brother Zhang. You've gained a blessing in disguise. You've successfully condensed the seal and become a heavenly master. Heavenly master. Zhang Canwen reacted and lowered his head to look at his hands. His eyes were filled with an indescribable and complicated emotion. I didn't say anything and just quietly looked at him. After a long time, his mind calmed down. He turned around and cupped his hands at me. Today, when I faced the heavenly punishment, I thought I would die. I didn't expect that I'd gain a blessing in disguise and become a heavenly master. Zhou Yi, thank you for protecting me. I was also very happy. I hurriedly waved my hands. Brother Zhang, what are you talking about? I should be the one thanking you for helping me fight against the heavenly punishment. Everything has a cause and effect. Brother Zhang, you've become a heavenly master because you helped yourself. Zhang Canwen was in a good mood. He laughed and didn't argue with me. All right. I won't thank you for today's matter, but don't blame me for destroying your room. After he said that, we looked at each other, then at the big hole in the wall. We laughed at the same time. Seeing that Jean Canwin's condition had recovered, Xie and Lu came in and congratulated Jean Canwin. The envy in their eyes was extremely thick. The fat man's room had first experienced the heavenly punishment and was burned into a complete mess. Then, when Jean Canwin had made his breakthrough, he had experienced the true essence storm. Even the walls and roof had been torn apart. It was impossible for anyone to stay here tonight. I asked Xie and Lu to help me carry the fatty to my room and let him rest on my bed. As for the damage to the fatty's room, Xie and Lu would arrange for people to repair it later. I was used to wandering outside. Although I treated this small shop as my home, I was very unfamiliar with Shenzhen. I had to rely on Xie and Lu to take care of most of the things. After settling the fatty down, it was around 5 or 6 a.m. I saw that the sky was getting brighter, so I didn't want to rest. I asked Wang Kuan and his wife to prepare 2 dishes in the kitchen and brought 2 bottles of white wine. Then, I drank with Jean Canwin in the room. Jean Canwin and I had known each other for many years, but this was the first time we drank together. Jean Canwin had broken through to the heavenly master realm. We were both happy, so we didn't use true essence to dispel the alcohol. After a few cups, we got drunk. After getting drunk, we started to talk more. We talked about how we met and got to know each other. We talked about Jean Canwin's teacher, Grandpa Zhao, and my close friend, Jean Canwin's younger brother, Zhang Wenfei. Jean Canwin couldn't hold it in any longer. A burly man with a full beard burst into tears in front of me. While crying, he stood up and knelt in the direction of the north. He called out, "Teacher, junior brother, today I became a heavenly master. Our Mount Wen lineage hasn't perished. Mount Wen lineage still exists." As he cried, I also felt sad. If I had gone to Mount Mei earlier, I might have been able to save Zhang Wenfei and Grandpa Zhao Dingwu. If that had happened, Mount Wen lineage wouldn't have been so sparsely populated. However, how difficult it was to prosper the country, and how worried it was to awaken the sage. Without the collapse of the great building at the end of the Song dynasty, there would have been no Prime Minister Wen's white robe to save the country. Without the tragic experience of Mount Wen lineage, there would have been no Zhang Canwin who carried the 4 words righteous today. Therefore, while I felt sad for Zhang Wenfei and Grandpa Zhao, I was even happier for Zhang Canwin and Mount Wen lineage. Back then, I had promised Grandpa Zhao that I would protect the legacy of Mount Wen lineage. Now that Zhang Canwin had become a heavenly master, I could finally answer to Grandpa Zhao. Moreover, after Zhang Canwin had become a heavenly master, he could share more of little Wang Li's burden for me, so that I wouldn't be tied down here. Little Wang Li was Zhang Canwin's disciple and also the successor of the Prime Minister lineage. In the future, after the evil in his body was expelled, little Wang Li's soul would be far stronger than ordinary people due to the many years of torture. His cultivation talent would also be much stronger. With Zhang Canwin, who had become a heavenly master, and little Wang Li, who had infinite talent, the prosperity of Mount Wen lineage wouldn't be far away. Grandpa Zhao's wish had finally come true. With emotions in my heart, Zhang Canwin and I drank until dawn. In the end, we both got drunk and fell asleep on the sofa. Xie Chenghua was very efficient. The next day, when I had just woken up, a team of workers had already arrived. They were waiting for us to wake up so that they could repair the damage in the shop. The damage last night was mainly concentrated in the fatty's room. Although the damage wasn't big, it would take 1 or 2 days to completely repair it. Since there weren't any extra rooms in the shop, we had to move the fatty to the bed in Zhang Canwin's room. In the next few days, Zhang Canwin and I could only stay here. Chapter 667. For the next 2 days, Zhang Canwin and I stayed in the room with the fatty. Although God's punishment had passed, we didn't know if it would befall again. After all, the purpose of God's punishment was to find out what the fatty had seen. But now, Zhang Canwin and I had seen that sentence, and the fatty was still alive. The purpose of God's punishment hadn't been achieved, and we couldn't guarantee if there would be a next time. Zhang Canwin and I were fine. Under God's punishment, we had profited from the disaster, and our power had increased. Even if God's punishment befell again, we would still have the power to fight back. However, the fatty was currently at his weakest. If it came again, he wouldn't be able to survive. So, we could only stay close to him and take care of him. On the other hand, although Zhang Kanwen had checked the fatty's body and said that he was fine and would wake up within 3 days, the power of God's punishment was unpredictable. Even Zhang Kanwen himself didn't dare to say that there was absolutely no problem with the results of his examination. We could only stay by the fatty's side to prevent any other accidents. Time passed quickly. In the next 2 days, nothing happened. The fatty's condition was neither good nor bad. He was still lying on the bed in a coma. His breathing was stable, and his body temperature was normal. However, he didn't respond to external stimuli. Zhang Kanwen said that he would sleep for 3 days, so I wasn't in a hurry and took care of him personally every day. On the 3rd day, because I knew that the fatty would wake up today, I didn't go anywhere for the entire day. I ate in the room. The day was very short. Soon, the sky darkened. The sun was setting in the west. Through the window, I saw that some of the tall buildings in the surrounding area had already lit up, preparing to welcome the darkness. At that moment, the fatty was still lying on the bed, and there was no sign of him waking up. I started to feel anxious and kept pacing in the room. Zhang Kanwen came in from outside the door and glanced at the fatty from afar. He sat opposite me and asked softly, "Still not awake?" I didn't answer, but frowned and shook my head. Zhang Kanwen's complexion wasn't any better than mine. In the past few days, besides occasionally taking care of little Wang Li, he had spent most of his time sitting in the room with me, waiting for the fatty's news. Obviously, he was worried about the fatty and the counterattack of God's punishment. In this dusk, time seemed to have frozen, becoming slow and heavy, pressing down on everyone to the point of suffocation. I understood that the 3 days that Zhang Kanwen mentioned was just a general concept. There was no difference between waking up a day earlier or a day later. However, the anxiety he had accumulated over the past few days had completely exploded on the last day. His heart just couldn't calm down. Seeing that I didn't want to talk, Zhang Kanwen didn't say anything else. He remained silent like me. Sometimes he would look at the fat guy, and sometimes he would look at the lights in the distance. The room was so quiet that only the 3 of us could hear our breathing. As the sky gradually darkened, the antique town downstairs entered the busiest time of the day again. It was bustling with noise and excitement. Some people laughed and squeezed into the crowd, while others stood where they were and called their friends. As I listened to their voices, I felt increasingly lonely and pressured. I don't have many friends and even fewer relatives. To me, Fatty is both a friend and a relative. Now that I don't know if he's alive or dead, how can I remain calm? I thought of the heavenly Tao again. Previously, the so-called heavenly Tao had already detained my wife. This time, it's the same thing that injured my brother. Regardless of whether Fatty could wake up or not, the grudge between me and the heavenly Tao had increased. In the midst of my uneasiness and hatred, the night sky couldn't be stopped anymore. The room was dark. Zhang Kanwen stood up and prepared to turn on the lights. The light and slow footsteps sounded especially ear-piercing in the extremely quiet room at this time. Suddenly, other than the breathing of the 3 of us and Zhang Kanwen's footsteps, there was another sound in the room. *T, why am I blind? It's Fatty. The moment I heard the voice, I confirmed that it was Fatty. I quickly stood up from the bed and ran to Fatty's side in the dark. Hearing Fatty's voice, Zhang Kanwen's movements sped up. Following a crisp pa, the room suddenly lit up at the same time I reached the side of the bed. Fatty had been unconscious for many days. Suddenly coming into contact with such strong light, his pupils dilated and he exclaimed, "It's so bright. Where's this place?" Fatty's voice was weak, but his tone was the same as usual. He laid on the bed and grabbed the blanket on top of him, hiding his head under it. The entire movement was done in one go. Seeing him like that, my worried heart finally calmed down. Just then, Zhang Kanwen rushed over from the door and looked at Fatty with me. After a while, Fatty quietly put down the blanket. After confirming that Zhang Kanwen and I were standing next to the bed, He lifted the blanket and jumped up from the bed. He hugged my neck with one hand and Zhang Canwen with the other. He shouted happily, "Third baby, old Zhang, I thought I would never see you again. It's great that I'm still alive." Zhang Canwen and I weren't prepared yet, so we were suddenly hugged by the fat man. We almost lost our balance and fell down. However, the fat man's action had undeniably resolved the haze that Zhang Canwen and I had been feeling for the past few days. All right. Now that you've just woken up, you should lie down first. Are you hungry? I'll go and get you something to eat. Zhang Canwen patted Fatty's back and said. Fatty hadn't eaten for 3 days, so he was probably very hungry. After hearing the suggestion, he naturally agreed happily. After saying okay 3 times, he obediently lay back on the bed. Zhang Canwen hurriedly left, and soon returned with a small bowl of porridge that he had prepared. Siek Chihua, Lu Chuanda, and the others also came with him. When they arrived at Fatty's bedside, they kept asking him how he was feeling. It was obvious that Fatty's sleep for the past few days had not only affected Zhang Canwen and my mood, but also the mood of the entire store. Now that Fatty had woken up, everyone's smile reappeared on their faces. Unexpectedly receiving so much concern, Fatty sat on the bed and smiled foolishly, continuously thanking everyone. After a long time, after everyone confirmed that Fatty was fine, they left one by one. Only Zhang Canwen and I were left in the room. After watching everyone leave, Fatty finally heaved a long sigh of relief. Without any hesitation, he ordered Zhang Canwen and me, "Quick, help me up. I'm starving." His body was weak, so Zhang Canwen and I helped him up from the bed to the dining table. When Fatty saw the food on the table, he immediately wailed, "Third baby, old Zhang, you guys are too crazy. Just 2 bowls of porridge. I'm so weak right now. You can't treat me like this. I want to eat meat." 2 bowls of porridge and a few side dishes. For someone like Fatty who couldn't live without meat, it was indeed a bit dismal. Zhang Canwen and I took turns to comfort him, telling him that he had just woken up, so it wasn't good to eat greasy food. He needed a rest for a while. At first, Fatty refuted us, saying that his body was good, so he didn't need to rest. He just needed to eat a lot of meat, and the meatier the better. However, seeing that Zhang Canwen and I didn't allow him to refuse, he finally accepted his fate and ate the 2 bowls of porridge with a bitter face. This guy really seemed to be starving. At first, he said that he didn't want to eat, but in the end, he didn't even have a drop of porridge left. Seeing that he had finished eating, Zhang Canwen and I helped him back to the bed and asked him about his current situation. I asked him, "Fatty, do you feel like there's anything wrong with your body?" Fatty looked at me suspiciously, then at Zhang Canwen. Then he pinched his body and closed his eyes to feel for a while. Nodding, he said, There shouldn't be any problem. Besides feeling a little weak, my body feels quite comfortable." Hearing that, the last stone in my heart was lifted and I heaved a long sigh of relief. It was good that Fatty was fine. My worries for the past few days weren't in vain. Just as I heaved a sigh of relief, Fatty's expression suddenly changed. He shouted, "Something's wrong. What's going on? Where's my Tao energy? Third baby, I can't feel my Tao energy." "What?" Zhang Canwen and I had just recovered, but our expressions changed again. Chapter 668. My face darkened. For cultivators, cultivation wasn't inferior to life. How many people had devoted decades of their lives to cultivation? A person's cultivation represented not only power, but also decades of hard work. Losing one's cultivation was equivalent to wasting decades of time. Who could bear it? Just like me back then, after my cultivation was crippled, I was depressed for several months. At that time, I even had the will to die. In the end, it was thanks to Yi Pianpian's care and the miraculous true dragon saliva that I recovered. I didn't dare to imagine what would happen if the fatty found out that his cultivation was destroyed. After listening to the fatty, not only me, but even Zhang Canwen couldn't help but look worried. In the past 2 days, the two of us had checked the fatty's body condition countless times. However, we focused on his health and didn't pay much attention to his cultivation. So far, we haven't found any problems with his cultivation. Jean Canwin and I sat next to the fatty, each holding one of his hands. Through the connection between our arms, we channeled our true essence into the fatty's body and began to check the fatty's veins of the heavens. There was nothing wrong with the fatty's body. His veins of the heavens were unobstructed, but just as the fatty had said, there was no trace of Tao Qi in his veins of the heavens. Although the realms of divination and geomancy masters were different, their fundamental cultivation was the same. They were both Tao Qi. With Jean Canwin's and my cultivation, as long as there was a trace of Tao Qi in the fatty's body, it wouldn't be able to escape our check. However, after checking several times, there was nothing. Jean Canwin and I looked at each other, our eyes filled with deep worry. The fatty allowed Jean Canwin and me to check his body. After noticing our gazes, he sighed and said dejectedly, "If it's gone, then it's gone." These years, I've seen so many magical places and encountered so many miraculous things. It's not a waste. However, I'm afraid I won't be able to help you save Lao AI or Yi Piampian in the future. Third baby, you. I looked at the fatty and interrupted him. "It's okay, fatty. Don't think too much." After saying that, I didn't care about the fatty's reaction. With the last bit of hope, I channeled my true essence into his dantian to check. The dantian was the foundation of a cultivator. Whether it was the Tao Qi of the Earth Master realm or the true essence of the Celestial Master realm, they all gathered there through the veins of the heavens. However, the dantian itself was very fragile. Therefore, cultivators wouldn't let anyone else check their dantian. If the person spying on him had ulterior motives or was slightly careless, then there would only be one result for the person being spied on, and that was to have his dantian crippled, and he would never be able to cultivate again. I knew what would happen if I didn't control my true essence well. The fatty knew it, and Jean Kimwen also knew it. But now, this was the only way to test if the fatty's Tao Qi was still there. Because of this, the fatty didn't stop my actions, and just gently turned his head to the side, no longer looking at me. Jean Kimwen also didn't stop my actions, and only withdrew his true essence from the fatty's body. He did this to protect the fatty and also to avoid disturbing my probing. I took a deep breath and circulated my true essence through the veins of the heavens. Soon, it reached the fatty's dantian. He went deeper into his dantian, but he did not sense any reaction from the qi of the way. He probed a little deeper, but still couldn't sense anything. 3 points was still the same. The dantian had a total of 9 parts. The first 3 parts were known as the upper dantian. Things like the Tao, energy, brilliant stars of the earthly master realm were mostly stored in the upper dantian. The middle 3 parts are called the middle dantian. In the middle dantian, it stores the true essence and seal of the celestial master realm. This is the same for me and Jean Canwin. When Fatty was in Wangwu Grotto Heaven, his cultivation was at the peak of Shermao. He was only 1 step away from entering the celestial master realm, becoming the first person in the Zhanyan sect to enter the celestial master realm in 100 years. However, in the end, he was unable to cross the threshold between heavenly master and earthly master to become a heavenly master. Therefore, his Tao Qi should be in his upper dantian. Now that the exploration of the 3 dantians had been completed, there was no trace of Tao Qi. This meant that the fatty's cultivation had most likely completely disappeared. I grimaced, but the fatty seemed to have recovered from the shock. He asked me calmly, "Third baby, how's the situation?" I didn't want to hide it from the fatty. After a moment of silence, I told him the truth. There's no trace of Tao Qi in the upper dantian. Hearing what I said, the fatty smiled as if he had been freed and didn't say anything. Jean Canwan, who was at the side, suddenly frowned and said to me, "There's no Tao Qi in the upper dantian, but it doesn't mean that the cultivation has disappeared. Maybe the fatty benefited from the disaster and advanced to the celestial master realm, like me." Before I said anything, the fatty smiled bitterly. The heavenly punishment isn't a good bird. It's good enough that it didn't kill me. How could it be a blessing? Although he rejected me, I was moved. What Jean Camlin said was indeed possible, but it wasn't a blessing from the disaster. The fatty had told me before that in order to enter the celestial master realm, not only did one have to have sufficient cultivation, but they also had to detect a major event that was related to the fate of the world. Only then could one become a celestial master. Although the fatty Jean-Lu didn't sound like a major event that was related to the fate of the world, it had attracted the heavenly punishment. Maybe the fatty had used this opportunity to successfully advance to the celestial master realm. After a cultivator stepped into the celestial master realm, their Dao Qi would be converted into true essence and stored in the middle Dantian. Under such circumstances, there wouldn't be any Dao Qi in the upper Dantian. I looked at the fatty. Although his expression was calm, as a close friend that had grown up together, how could I not know the despair in the fatty's heart? Seeing this, I gritted my teeth and sent my true essence into the fatty's middle Dantian. I'll treat a hopeless situation as a last resort. Compared to the upper Dantian, the middle Dantian was much weaker. Hence, before entering the middle Dantian, I had purposely weakened my true essence, afraid that I would hurt the fatty if I wasn't careful. I carefully controlled a wisp of true essence and sent it into the fatty's middle Dantian. Just as I was about to move forward, a soft force suddenly appeared in the fatty's middle Dantian and sent my true essence out. I frowned. What was going on? If the fatty's cultivation had really been erased by the heavenly punishment, then there shouldn't be anyone in his Dantian. Even if my wisp of true essence was much weaker, it wasn't something that a normal person without cultivation could fight against. For there to be such power in the fatty's middle Dantian, there seemed to be a chance. Just as I was about to gather true essence again and send it into the fatty's middle Dantian, I saw that the fatty was frowning, as if he was in great pain. The Dantian was very weak. Although I controlled my true essence very lightly, it would still bring great discomfort to the fatty. I took a deep breath and said to the fatty, "Bear with it. I'll try one more time. No matter what the result is, I'll withdraw my true essence. Is that all right?" "All right." The fatty wasn't as talkative as he usually was. He just nodded. "Bear with it," I thought, and gathered true essence again, sending it into the fatty's middle Dantian. With the previous experience, this time I wasn't as blind as before. I condensed a bit more true essence. I didn't hope to break through the obstruction of that power. I just wanted to stay in the fatty's Dantian for a second longer. In just 1 second, I could clearly feel the situation in the fatty's middle Dantian. I controlled my true essence and carefully approached the fatty's Dantian. After smoothly breaking through the upper Dantian, I stopped at the intersection of the upper Dantian and middle Dantian. Then, I gritted my teeth and sent my true essence in. It was the same situation as before. Just as my true essence entered the fatty's middle Dantian, that gentle power welcomed it. It was like a wave, slowly washing me. The last time was too short, so I couldn't identify what this power was. But this time I could feel it. Could this be true essence? If this was true essence, why couldn't the fatty feel it? Why could it only move in the middle Dantian and not enter the upper Dantian? There was only 1 second. Although the energy in the fatty's body was as gentle as a wave, it kept rejecting my true essence. So, the time I could use to investigate the situation was less than 1 second. Time was tight, so I didn't think too much and directly released my true essence. Just as I released my true essence, I found a huge mass of qi in the fatty's middle Dantian. It was a mass of true essence that appeared after Dao Qi had turned into true essence. This meant that the fatty had indeed advanced to Sky Master. But very quickly, I found that the true essence mass was covered in a layer of golden membrane. Moreover, that golden membrane was emitting a shocking power. That was the power of the way of heaven. I couldn't be more familiar with this power. 3 days ago, Jean Canwin and I had come into contact with it. Thanks to it, Jean Canwin had entered the Sky Master realm, and my cultivation had also advanced. 1 second passed in the blink of an eye. Just as I understood what that power was, the fatty's true essence pushed my true essence to the barrier between the upper dantian and middle dantian. Here, the power of the way of heaven and the fatty's true essence was even more obvious. It seemed to be attached to the barrier, imprisoning the fatty's true essence. In an instant, my true essence collided with the power of the way of heaven and disappeared. At the same time, I opened my eyes. Chapter 669. After I opened my eyes, I exhaled. Then, I looked at the fatty and Jean Canwin and told him my guess. Just as I thought, the fatty didn't become a celestial master by absorbing the power of God's punishment. Instead, it was because of what had happened during the Jean Shilu battle. He followed the Jean Shilu's advancement method and became the first person in the Jean Shilu faction to become a celestial master. However, it was precisely because of this trial that the fatty was punished by the heavenly way. As such, not only did the heavenly way injure the fatty, but it also left its power in the fatty's dantian, sealing the chi of the way that had just transformed into true origin energy. Hence, the fatty was unable to sense his own Tao Chi. The current situation was that the fatty had already become a heaven's master, but his cultivation was sealed. If he wanted to use his power, he had to break through the heaven's restriction. After I said that, the fatty's confusion instantly disappeared. He asked me excitedly, "So I'm already a heaven's master?" After I nodded, the fatty laughed loudly. "I knew it. Third baby, you've already become a heaven's master. It won't be long before I become a heaven's master too. I didn't expect that after just one divination, I would become the heaven's master that so many people yearn for. I, Lin Hu, am really a genius." Ha ha! Although Zhang Canwen didn't know about the martial arts competition between Lu Jinyang and me, he had participated in Fatty's coma from start to finish. Furthermore, he had checked Fatty's body's condition. Towards my words, he naturally believed them. However, after hearing my words, he didn't rejoice and instead furrowed his eyebrows. I knew what he was worried about, because I was extremely worried as well. On the surface, not only did the sky's punishment not cause us any harm, it even allowed Zhang Canwen and me to absorb the power of the heavens. We gained many benefits, and Zhang Canwen even advanced to become a heaven's master. However, in actual fact, the reason why I could use the power of the heavens was because of the heavens master seal. Otherwise, it wouldn't have been possible. Zhang Canwen, on the other hand, was able to use the power of the heavens to break through to the heavens master realm because of Wan Shan's inheritance. The only exception was the fatty. He was completely powerless against the heavenly punishment, which resulted in him being seriously injured. Now that his cultivation base was sealed, it would be extremely difficult for him to break through the seal. Breaking through to the heavenly master realm was naturally a good thing, but because of this seal, Fatty could not use the power of a heavenly master, even though he had the cultivation of a heavenly master. The situation he was facing now was even more embarrassing than having his cultivation destroyed. Although Fatty had always been an optimist and was currently immersed in the excitement of breaking through to the celestial master realm, he would soon discover this problem. When that time came, he would probably not be able to laugh anymore. Zhang Canwen and I exchanged glances. At that moment, we didn't know how to remind the fatty. It had to be said that the fatty really had a big heart. After laughing foolishly for a while, he didn't notice that my and Zhang Canwen's expressions weren't right. Instead, he laughed and asked me, "That's right, third baby, you said that I was injured by the power of the heavens because I was trying to verify the matter of chasing the deer. Why can't I remember anything about it? Do you know what I found at that time?" Of course, I know what he found. Encountering the yang brings danger. Seeking the yin brings protection. There were a total of 8 words. Hearing him ask about this, I turned to look at Zhang Canwen and shook my head slightly to signal him not to speak. Then, I turned to the fatty and said, "How would I know the result of your divination? When we received your message and rushed over, we found you unconscious on the ground. After that, we saved you from the god's punishment and took care of you for 3 days without rest. You only woke up today. I was about to ask you what exactly you found. I naturally didn't want to lie to the fatty on purpose. It was just that the heavens didn't hesitate to send down divine punishment to erase the fatty's divination result. From this, it could be seen that there was definitely a huge secret hidden in those 8 words. Hence, I didn't dare to tell the fatty about this result. If the god's punishment were to descend again, Jean Canwin and I would still be able to deal with it. However, it would be hard to say for the fatty situation. Jean Canwin and I could take care of him for a while, but there would always be a time when we couldn't. Hence, it was better to hide it from him for now. Seeing me like this, Jean Canwin also reacted quickly and nodded his head. The fatty looked confused. He rubbed his head and said dejectedly, I vaguely remember that I seemed to have divined something. It seemed to be something very important to you, third baby. I was anxious to tell you, but then I fainted. King God's punishment. Why can't I remember? After being troubled for a while, he turned to look at me and said solemnly, but don't worry, third baby. I'll definitely try to recall it in the next 2 days. If I really can't remember, I'll wait for a few days after my body is fully recovered. Then I'll try again. I don't believe that King God's punishment can stop me once, but it can stop me a second time. Hearing his words, I jumped in shock. I wanted to persuade him not to do so, but before I could speak, I remembered that the fatty couldn't use any of his cultivation. If he wanted to try again, he would have to solve the matter of the god's punishment seal in his body first. Thus, I heaved a sigh of relief and smiled at the fatty. Divining is just a supplementary method. Regardless of whether we can succeed or not, we have to go to Julu. When the time comes, we'll deal with whatever comes our way. We'll just do our best. You don't have to worry too much about this. At this moment, the fatty probably remembered that he couldn't use his cultivation for the time being. He could only nod dejectedly. That's all we can do then. But I have a feeling that this trip to Julu won't be that dangerous. Look at that ugly Lu Jinyang. It's been so many years, and he hasn't gotten any benefits from you. I reckon it'll be the same this time. Even if there's an accident, I, the Fat Lord, have always been a good person. I'll definitely protect you. After he finished boasting shamelessly, he reached out and patted my shoulder. It seemed that he was protecting me. I smiled. I understood that the fatty was consoling me. However, I was thinking about something else in my heart. Previously, when I asked the fatty to go with me to Julu, I thought that we could obtain the monster refining gourd. It would be enough to save our lives. After that, we also obtained the heaven-measuring ruler, so we had another life. Originally, the situation was great. Even if we couldn't get any benefits from Lu Jinyang, we wouldn't be at a disadvantage. However, after the incident with Tian Fa, the fatty's cultivation had been sealed. No matter if it was the monster refining gourd or the heaven-measuring ruler, they would be temporarily unable to be used. Since it was related to the monster refining gourd in the second volume of the Death Scripture, I had to go to Julu. However, from the current situation, it was better to go alone than to bring the fatty along. However, I didn't know how to tell the fatty. With his personality, he most likely wouldn't agree. Moreover, it would provoke the fatty and make him realize that he had temporarily become immortal. I didn't say anything, but the fatty had already started to guess the situation on Lu Jinyang's side. He asked me, I don't know if the ox-nosed Taoists from Mount Longhu have found Lu Jinyang. Perhaps by the time we go to Julu, Lu Jinyang would have already been killed by the people from Mount Longhu. After all, Mount Longhu had 2,000 years of history. Celestial Master Zhang's power was extraordinary. No matter how powerful Lu Jinyang was, he couldn't be compared to Celestial Master Zhang. Of course, I also hoped that Lu Jinyang would be killed. However, I understood that the current Celestial Master Zhang wouldn't easily make a move. Moreover, the other people from Mount Longhu wouldn't be Lu Jinyang's match. Even if the two sides encountered each other, the chances of Lu Jinyang being killed would be minuscule. At this moment, the fatty was still immersed in the joy of becoming a heavenly master. He bluntly said that he hoped that Lu Jinyang would quickly tell us his specific address so that we could meet up as soon as possible. Now that he was also a heavenly master, he really wanted to use his heavenly master realm formations to meet Lu Xingyang. Not to mention the fact that the fatty had just become a heavenly master and that his cultivation was sealed. Even if he had the cultivation of a peak heavenly master and the monster refining gourd, he most likely wouldn't be Lu Xingyang's match. I knew that the fatty was just joking around, so I didn't say anything and just smiled at him. The room quickly quieted down. Chapter 670. Previously, when we were preparing to return from Wangwu Grotto Heaven and discuss this matter with Lu Xingyang, we agreed that it would be a month. During this time, Fatty and I went back to our hometown, then went to Fire God Temple to see Tao Wu, and then hurried back to deal with Little Wang Li's matter. Finally, it was Fatty's matter in the past 2 days. After careful calculation, more than half a month had passed. There were only about 5 days left before the agreed 1-month period. So I said to Zhang Canwen, about 5 days. Zhang Canwen looked at Fatty and I and sighed. That's only a few days. I haven't had much contact with Lu Xingyang, but from what you said, I can roughly tell that he's not only powerful, but also very cunning. Not only is this person powerful, but he is also very cunning. You must be careful this time. Speaking of which, I should go with you. But the matter with Wang Li is really... I shook my head with a smile and said to Zhang Canwen, Big brother Zhang, don't worry. It's not the first time I've fought with Lu Xingyang. Nothing happened before, and nothing will happen this time. You can rest assured. Take good care of little Wang Li and wait for me and Fatty to come back. After saying that, I patted his shoulder. Fatty had been punished by God because of the Zhulu incident. I didn't need Zhang Canwen to tell me that in his eyes, the trip to Zhulu was obviously a trap. Knowing that it was a trap, Zhang Canwen naturally couldn't do such a thing and watch Fatty and I jump into it. I could imagine that if there was no little Wang Li, he would definitely follow me like Wang can. I knew what he was planning, but from my point of view, I didn't want him to go with me. My relationship with Lu Xingyang had already involved too many people. I had just refused Officer Wang. Now, if I dragged Zhang Canwen into this, it would be unreasonable. Moreover, the things that Zhang Canwen was carrying were no less than Wang Can. As the three of us chatted, the moon was already high up in the sky. Fatty had slept for 3 days in one go, so he was very energetic. Naturally, he didn't want to sleep for a while. He pulled me and Zhang Canwen and asked about the things that had happened while he was unconscious. They chatted until dawn. Because his body had not fully recovered, Fatty finally felt a little tired and fell into a deep sleep. Seeing that the Fatty had fallen asleep, Zhang Can and I quietly left the room and returned to our own rooms to rest. After 3 days, the damaged room had naturally been repaired. Furthermore, I was exhausted from the past few days. After returning to my room, my spirit was also slightly exhausted. However, I couldn't fall asleep as I lay on the bed. The Fatty was currently in a state of excitement and did not realize that his true essence had been sealed by the power of the heavens. However, once he woke up, he would definitely not be so optimistic. The bigger problem was the upcoming trip to Zhulu. If there was still a lot of time before the deer-chasing mountain, it would be fine. But since we were about to set off for the deer-chasing mountain, the Fatty wouldn't be able to use his cultivation. Even I would have to face great danger. Although I wasn't afraid of Lu Xingyang, there was no reason for me to take the initiative to throw my life away. Therefore, Fatty's matter had to be resolved as soon as possible. Otherwise, the situation would be unimaginable. After lying on the bed and thinking for a whole night, I came up with 2 solutions in my head. The first method was to use the power of my Celestial Master Seal to enter Fatty's Dantian and consume the power of the heavenly punishment. That way, I would be able to remove the seal in Fatty's body. This was the fastest and most effective method. However, at the same time, it was also the most dangerous method. The Dantian was already weak. Previously, I had only used a small amount of true essence to enter Fatty's Dantian, and it had already caused him to grit his teeth and frown. The Celestial Master Seal was the foundation of a Celestial Master's cultivation. The power contained within it could be said to be incomparably ferocious. My forward Celestial Master Seal was even more so. If I really sent my Celestial Master Seal into Fatty's Dantian, the pain that he would have to face would increase by more than 10 times. If I was the slightest bit careless, not only would my dantian be destroyed, I might even end up harming Fatty's life. Furthermore, since ancient times, I had never heard of anyone sending their celestial master seal into someone else's dantian. So, after thinking of this method, I decisively gave up on it after some consideration. Compared to cultivation, Fatty's life was more important. If I had to use this method to remove the seal on Fatty's body, I would rather he carry the seal with him forever. It was better to be immortal than to lose his life. This method was too dangerous, but fortunately, it was not the only way to remove the seal. A few days ago, when we were facing the power of the heavenly punishment, Jean Canwin had used the secret method of Winshan to absorb the power of the heavenly punishment together with me. In the end, he had even used the power of the heavenly punishment to break through to the celestial master realm. From this, it could be seen that the secret method that Jean Canwin had used at that time would definitely have an effect on the power of the heavenly punishment. If he could impart this method to Fatty, not only would it allow Fatty to remove the power of the seal, but it would also allow Fatty to use the power of the seal to increase his own cultivation. Wouldn't that be the best of both worlds? However, although this method was feasible and effective, and would not be dangerous at all, the problem was that this secret method was related to the inheritance of Winshan. Although Jean Canwin treated us as his family, when it came to matters of inheritance, I had no confidence. Inheritance was the foundation of a person's life. Back then, the reason why the Winshan lineage had made such a name for themselves in May Mountain wasn't only because of Lord Zhao's character, but also because of the secret techniques passed down by the Winshan lineage. It was also because of these secret methods that Jean Canwin's uncle, Jean Canwin, and his two disciples had turned against each other in the end. Now, Winshan's people had withered to the extreme, and only Jean Canwin was left. The only thing they could rely on were these secret methods. If Jean Canwin also spread these secret arts, then who knew what else Winshan's lineage would have left? Furthermore, the person who needed the secret methods was Fatty. Given my friendship with Jean Canwin, if I were the one who needed the secret methods, Jean Canwin would most likely agree without hesitation. However, his friendship with Fatty hadn't reached that stage yet. In fact, I felt sorry for Jean Canwin. At this time, the heavy burden of Winshan was on his shoulders. If he took a wrong step, he would be consigned to eternal damnation. That was why I didn't want to trouble him. However, the problem was that time was tight. Apart from this, I couldn't think of any other way. I could either make things difficult for him or myself. No matter which choice I made, it would be very difficult for me. I sat in my room and pondered for a long time. In the end, I decided to ask Jean Canwin, regardless of whether Jean Canwin agreed or not. After this, I would promise myself that I would help Jean Canwin and Winshan for the rest of my life. I would also share a part of the responsibility on his shoulders. It could be considered as making up for the trouble I'd caused him. After making up my mind, I didn't hesitate anymore and went to Jean Canwin's room. At this time, Jean Canwin had already woken up and was sitting in meditation to stabilize his heavenly master realm. Since I had a lot on my mind, I didn't bother with pleasantries and directly told him what I wanted to say. I thought that I would make things difficult for Jean Canwin, but I didn't expect that after listening to me, he would agree without hesitation. It would have been fine if he had refused, but agreeing would have made me feel even more guilty. After a moment of silence, I cupped my hands at him and said solemnly, "Big brother Jean, I know that it's too much to ask you to impart your sex secret method to someone else, but I don't have any other choice this time. I can't thank you enough for your kindness. From now on, Winshan's matters will be my matters." Seeing how solemn I was, Jean Canwin hastily waved his hand and said to me with a wry smile, Don't. You've misunderstood. Although this devouring method is miraculous, it's not an inherited secret method of Winshan's. It's a hand seal that I obtained by chance from somewhere else. It has nothing to do with our lineage's inheritance. You don't have to worry. This secret method to devour the power of heavenly punishment isn't an inheritance of Winshan's lineage. Chapter 671. On the path of cultivation, in addition to talent and willpower, opportunities were also very important. Some people couldn't cross the threshold of drawing chi into threads their entire lives, while others could rely on their own opportunities to obtain the inheritance of their ancestors and have a smooth journey on the path of cultivation. Previously, in the blessed enclave, sheathed edge and armor stripping were bestowed with dual swords by the heavens. Li Yuan and Hu Yurong, whom Zhao Hao had found, had also relied on opportunities and inheritances to become famous. Even for me, if it wasn't for Bayan giving me the death scripture by chance, I'm afraid I would still be a mediocre mortal. Therefore, when Zhang Canwen said that he had accidentally obtained the inheritance of this hand seal technique from somewhere else, I didn't doubt it and quickly accepted his explanation. After settling this matter, I left Zhang Canwen's room and went to find the fatty. In the end, the fatty slept until the afternoon and still hadn't woken up. I stood next to his bed and called him for a long time. Although I managed to wake him up, I let him continue to rest when I saw his sleepy face. While he was sleeping, I had nothing to do, so I went to see little Wang Li. I had been busy with the fatty's matters for the past few days, so I hadn't paid attention to little Wang Li. I didn't know how he was doing. When I arrived at little Wang Li's room, Zhang Canwen was already there. He was combing little Wang Li's meridians. Unlike me, Zhang Canwen was little Wang Li's master, so he was much more attentive to the little guy than I was. Every day, no matter what, he would come over to check little Wang Li's body and comb his meridians, rain or shine. After breaking through to the heavenly master realm, Zhang Canwen was much more energetic than before, and he looked like a new person. Today, he had shaved his beard clean and was wearing a green robe. Looking at the way he took out the heavenly master seal to comb little Wang Li's meridians, he really looked like an immortal. Because of his heavenly master cultivation base, the power that Zhang Canwen could use was much stronger than before. The combing process, which originally took an hour to complete, was now shortened by more than half. After a while, he finished the whole process and put away the heavenly master seal. Seeing him stop, I walked forward and picked up little Wang Li. When Zhang Canwen saw me, he exhaled deeply. Although it was not difficult for him to sort out little Wang Li's meridians at the heavenly master realm, Zhang Canwen's expression was not very good. He was frowning, obviously still worried about little Wang Li's condition. I lifted little Wang Li's shirt. The little fellow's chest was still sunken in like before. A wisp of black smoke lingered in it with a faint, evil aura. Compared to a few days ago, this evil aura seemed to have grown a lot. It was no wonder that Zhang Canwen sighed. Although little Wang Li was fine for the time being, his condition could still worsen. It would be difficult for him to hold on for too long. No one knew when the next relapse would come. When I recalled the power of the ghostly face covered in black smoke, my face turned gloomy. Zhang Canwen looked at me and shook his head. His condition hasn't improved. Although I have the cultivation of a heavenly master, I tried it just now, but it didn't work. I can only nurse his body every day to make the little fella feel better. Once the thing in the pit went crazy, I wouldn't be able to suppress it for long. We need to come up with a plan for this matter. I nodded and thought for a moment. When I come back, I'll think a way to find someone. As long as I can find that person, there should be some progress. When I had suppressed the evil aura on little Wang Li, I had inexplicably associated it with the sacrificial evil spirit. At that time, I didn't know why, but I felt that the evil aura on little Wang Li might be useful after seeing it. But in the past few days, according to my observation, I gradually found that the evil aura on little Wang Li's body seemed to be somewhat similar to the aura of the sacrificial evil spirit. Although I didn't know why, as long as I found the sacrificial evil spirit and asked him to check on little Wang Li's condition, there would definitely be a turn for the better. With that thought in mind, I made up my mind. After we returned from Jalou, the first thing we would do was to find the sacrificial evil spirit and try to get rid of the time bomb tied to little Wang Li. Hearing that, Zhang Canwen was slightly stunned, but he didn't ask much. He just nodded and heaved a sigh of relief. After talking about this, Zhang Kanwen and I sat in little Wang Li's room for a while. After Wang Kuan called us to have dinner together, we went to the fatty's room together. The fatty was still sleeping, but this time, I gently pushed him and he opened his eyes. It was obvious that he had slept well. He didn't look drowsy like before, and he jumped up from the bed. He looked like a dragon and a tiger, and it was impossible to tell that he had just been seriously injured. Seeing that he was fine, I also heaved a sigh of relief. I exchanged glances with Zhang Kanwen and walked to the bedside. Each of us stretched out a hand and pressed the fatty down. The fatty was dumbfounded and asked curiously, "What are you doing?" Previously, because we couldn't think of a way to solve the fatty's true essence seal, we deliberately didn't remind him. Now that we had a solution, we didn't hide it anymore and told him about the matter of his true essence being sealed. Fatty wasn't completely heartless. At this time, he had also thought through this matter. After listening to me, he pursed his lips and said, "I noticed this a long time ago, but it's fine as long as I advance to the Sky Master rank." That seal, to put it bluntly, is actually similar to a formation. After I go back and study it for a few days, I'll definitely solve the seal. He was confident, but even if he could really solve the seal, he didn't know how long it would take. Moreover, the trip to Zhualu was imminent. There was no time for him to slowly solve it. Before I spoke, Zhang Kanwen smiled and said, "It's best if you can solve the seal yourself. However, as long as the seal isn't broken, you won't be able to use your power. I have a hand seal technique here that can absorb the power of the sky punishment." I wonder, what? When the fatty heard that, he immediately stopped bragging and grinned. He said to Zhang Kanwen, "Big brother Zhang, you're really a selfless lay phone. How do I practice this hand seal? Can you teach it to me now?" This fellow was really shameless. Previously, he had bragged so much, but when he heard that Zhang Kanwen had a solution, he immediately changed his attitude. Zhang Kanwen was going to impart the hand seal technique to him anyway, so he naturally wouldn't be bothered by it and quickly nodded in agreement. When the fatty heard that, he was so excited that he didn't even care about his meal. He clamored for Zhang Kanwen to impart the hand seal technique to him immediately. This fellow was really like a human. He even said that after he solved the seal, he would first help Zhang Kanwen read his fortune to tell his marriage fate. He even said that if Wen Shan's lineage wanted to flourish, it wasn't enough to just rely on taking in disciples. He had to have a few more himself. Zhang Kanwen's face flushed red when he heard that, and he almost wanted to quit. Even I couldn't help but laugh at the side. After fooling around for a while, the fatty went to eat first before returning to his room to sit down. Zhang Kanwen was prepared to impart the hand seal technique to him. Seeing that they were about to start, I prepared to stand up and leave. Although the hand seal that could devour the power of the heavens wasn't an inherited technique from Zhang Kanwen's lineage, it was still extremely important. If I stayed here to listen, I would inevitably be suspected of stealing his teachings. However, just as I stood up, Zhang Kanwen stopped me and said, "This devouring soul hand seal isn't a secret. You don't need to be an outsider. Previously, when you were fighting against the sky's punishment, I saw that you used the seal to devour the sky's punishment. I think that your seal should have the power to devour. However, you're still unfamiliar with it. Stay here and study the devouring soul hand seal. Perhaps you'll be able to comprehend it by analogy and gain more control over the devouring power." Zhang Kanwen spoke sincerely. When the fatty heard that the hand seal would be beneficial to me, he and Zhang Kanwen urged him to stay. This time, I couldn't refuse, so I could only stay. Zhang Kanwen was right. I really didn't know how to use the seal's devouring power. Whether it was absorbing the power of the celestial master seals from Mount Longhu or absorbing the power of the sky's punishment, they were all passive. The devouring power was stimulated, and I still couldn't control it. If Zhang Kanwen's devouring soul hand seal could really help me solve this problem, my power would definitely increase. Seeing that I stayed, Zhang Kanwen and the fatty smiled knowingly. They didn't say anything else and started to impart the devouring soul hand seal. As I watched Zhang Kanwen practice the hand seal, I didn't think much of it first. However, as I continued to impart more knowledge, I gradually felt that something was wrong. In the past few years, I had seen many of the techniques of Mount Wen's lineage. I had even personally used their treasure, the Yin-Yang Yama brush. Therefore, I was very familiar with the aura of Mount Wen's lineage. Moreover, the aura of Mount Wen's lineage was very heavy in this hand seal. After realizing this, I felt somewhat uncomfortable. However, since Zhang Qianwen had already said it, I couldn't say anything else. I would be letting down his good intentions. Chapter 672. 5 days passed in the blink of an eye. In the past 5 days, the fatty and I had been concentrating on practicing Zhang Qianwen's soul-devouring handprint. I had to admit that the lineage of Mount Wen was mystical. Just the soul-devouring handprint alone made me realize this point. With the soul-devouring handprint, not only did it increase my understanding of the power of devouring, it also improved my control of the Celestial Master Seal. More importantly, I could now actively use the seal's power of devouring. This undoubtedly increased my power greatly. I was immersed in the mysteriousness of the soul-devouring handprint, while the fatty placed all his hopes of breaking the seal on the handprint. In the past 5 days, he had once again sunk into a frenzied state where he didn't step out of his house. His hard work wasn't in vain. On the second day, after learning the handprint from Zhang Qianwen, he told me that he felt the presence of true essence. After 5 days of hard work, he had dissolved more than half of the seal on the power of sky punishment. This once again overturned my understanding of the lineage of Mount Wen. I originally thought that even though the soul-devouring handprint was mystical, it wasn't worth mentioning compared to the power of sky punishment. Even if he could break the seal, he would need at least 10 days of effort. It would already be good for the fatty to use a little bit of his power before the deer-chasing expedition. I didn't expect that in less than 5 days, the seal in the fatty's body had already been dissolved by half. He could even use 30 to 40% of his cultivation. As he had already reached the Celestial Master Realm, 30 to 40% of his cultivation wasn't much different from the complete glory of knowledge. Thus, for the past 2 days, the fatty's face was filled with joy and didn't look as distressed as before. Looking at the situation, the seal in the fatty's body would be completely dissolved in another 10 to 15 days. Furthermore, due to the soul-devouring handprint having the power of devouring, it was highly possible that the fatty would be able to form the Celestial Master Seal after devouring the power of sky punishment. Thinking about that, I started to look forward to the words on the fatty's seal. From the fatty's actions, if a seal had 4 words, I reckoned that it would be born to be a foodie. On the day that I had agreed to meet with Lu Jinyang, I had just opened my eyes. Before I even got out of bed, a wave of heat was emitted from the sound transmitting talisman in my bosom. It's here. I took out the sound transmitting talisman. Sure enough, it was Lu Jinyang's sound transmitting talisman. I revolved my true essence, and the light screen of the sound transmitting talisman surged out. As the sinister aura around Lu Jinyang's body became denser, 2 lines of words appeared in front of me. 2 days later, Tower Village. Ever since Lu Jinyang came out of the mausoleum of the Shang dynasty, his entire temperament had undergone an earth-shaking change. He had changed from the arrogant young master of a rich family to a cold, gloomy, and iron-masked man who treasured his words like gold. If he could explain it in 1 word, he wouldn't say it twice. Looking at the words slowly vanishing in front of me, I suddenly calmed down. He had already decided to participate in the martial arts competition. No matter what schemes Lu Jinyang had, they would all be exposed in 2 days. Rather than constantly worrying, it was better to face them calmly. After I put away Lu Jinyang's sound transmission talisman, the fatty opened his eyes on the floor not far from me. This guy, because he wanted to verify the soul-devouring handprint with me, had been staying in my room for the past few days. It was obvious that he hadn't slept at all last night, as he was busy dispelling the heaven seal. Looking at my actions, the fatty asked, "Is there news about Lu Jinyang?" I nodded. The fatty asked again, "There's finally news. When are we heading to Hebei?" Even though the fatty's advancement had been godly, 2 days wasn't enough for him to completely dispel the seal. I sighed. There's still 2 more days. It's a pity that your seal hasn't been completely dispelled. Why not? Before I could finish my sentence, the fatty understood what I meant and interrupted me. How can we do that? The martial art competition was decided by the 2 of us and Lu Jinyang. How can I let you go alone? I know that with my current power, it's hard to deal with Lu Jinyang. But don't we still have 2 days? I'll work harder in these 2 days. No matter what, I'll be able to recover 60 to 70% of my power. At that time, with my Heaven's Master Realm cultivation, I'll be able to be of some use. The fatty insisted on going because he was worried about my safety. But while he was worried about me, how could I not be worried about him? If the fatty had reached the Heaven's Master Realm and condensed the Heaven's Master Seal, with his mystical formation, he'd be able to protect himself against Lu Jinyang. With the power of the measuring heaven ruler and the monster refining gourd, I naturally had nothing to worry about. But the current problem was that the fatty's cultivation hadn't recovered yet. Even if he could recover a little in these 2 days, it would still be too dangerous for him to face Lu Jinyang without becoming a Heaven's Master and condensing the seal. But before I could say anything, the fatty turned around and continued to cultivate the soul-devouring hand seal. Seeing that he was so serious in cultivating, I couldn't reject him anymore. I could only sigh and leave the room. A few days ago, after Zhang Qinwen passed the soul-devouring hand seal to the fatty and me, he said that he was going out for a few days and entrusted little Wang Li to me, asking me to take care of him for a few days. At that time, I asked him what he was going to do, but he didn't tell me and just went out. So in the past few days, besides cultivating, I came to check on little Wang Li a few times a day. When I reached little Wang Li's room, Wang Kuan and his wife had already gotten up and were waiting for me in the room. I walked over and held little Wang Li for a long time. Although the situation hadn't worsened, I couldn't help but worry. Zhang Qinwen hadn't returned for a long time, but he didn't say why. Although he already had the cultivation of a Heaven's Master and I wasn't worried, I was worried that if he didn't come back, I would have to leave in 2 days. At that time, there would be no one to take care of little Wang Li. If something happened, it would be big trouble. While I was thinking about my worries, little Wang Li woke up from his dream. His watery eyes blinked as he looked at me. I didn't know if he had a good dream, but he grinned at me. The little fellow's angelic smile made the irritation in my heart slightly lessen. I reached out and scratched his nose, whispering, "I don't know where your master ran off to, but you don't have to worry. I, Junior Marshal Uncle, will take care of you. Come, let's finish today's task first." As I said that, I put him back on the bed, circulated my true yuan, and began to sort out the little fellow's meridians. After taking care of the little fellow every day for the past few days, I had learned the meridian sorting technique from Zhang Qinwen and was already very proficient. My true yuan entered little Wang Li's body bit by bit, constantly circulating and nourishing his meridians. Little Wang Li's soul was naturally strong. Otherwise, he wouldn't have been able to withstand the evil creature's scourge for nearly 2 years. In addition, Zhang Qinwen and I had been constantly sorting out his meridians. In the future, when the evil creature was expelled and he began to cultivate with Zhang Qinwen, he would definitely become a peerless genius that wasn't inferior to me. Although Zhang Qinwen had already advanced to the Heaven's Master rank, if Mount Wen wanted to truly flourish, I would still have to rely on this baby who was still in swaddling clothes. After absorbing the power of God's punishment, my cultivation had also greatly improved. When I was sorting out little Wang Li's meridians, I was much faster than Zhang Qinwen. In less than 10 minutes, I slowly withdrew the true yuan from the little fellow's body. The little fellow also cooperated and laughed at me. He waved his 2 lotus root-like arms, asking me to hug him. Looking at his adorable appearance, I grinned but didn't hug him. I just pinched his nose and smiled. "Don't worry, Marshal Uncle will prepare more things for you today." After saying that, I formed a seal with both hands and pressed on my dantian, summoning the seal. I didn't know what Zhang Qinwen was busy with, but he hadn't returned yet. If Zhang Qinwen still couldn't return after I left, I would definitely be worried about leaving little Wang Li in the care of Xie Changhua and Lu Chuanda. Therefore, in order to avoid such a situation, I had to make preparations in advance and leave more tricks on Little Wongley. After absorbing the power of God's punishment, my seal had broken through to 5 feet and 6 inches. Coupled with the changes in the seal, although my cultivation hadn't reached the late stage of the seal, my strength had completely surpassed the late stage of the Heaven's Master rank. Compared to when I had just returned, I was much stronger. I circulated my true yuan and drove the Celestial Master seal towards Little Wongley. The reason I was able to seal the black smoke ghost face that came out of the little fellow's body was mainly because I had the 4 words "Born Saint" on my seal. You're tuning into the Warrior Lore YouTube channel. Don't forget to subscribe and join us on this journey to catch the most captivating stories.